जी, वाहिगुरु जी का खालसा, वाहिगुरु जी की fateh. Sangat ji, we have Ranjit Singh ji joined us from Azadism, and he's doing an amazing job. Paisab is from UK, and he is running this project and is trying to aware our community and giving a different perspective from an economic side, and just talking about Sikh statecraft. And so, like to welcome Paisavji on our Discord server. Paisavji, welcome to Discord. And Sangat is here, and we're just waiting for a few more people to join. So we'll be starting in like 2 minutes. But Paisavji, please feel free to share a quick intro or your background.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Sri Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Thank you for guys for joining and listening to this sort of talk on Azadism. I mentioned to George Singh Baji that I'd like this to be more question answer based, more discussion format because there's a lot of content to cover in Azadism. It covers a lot of different topics and stuff within it. So it's a bit unfeasible to try and go through exactly everything in there. So it'd be better actually just to do a question answer. But I'll give an overview of what Azadism is and everything. But obviously, I'll give a bit of background about myself. So as Baji mentioned, I'm from the UK. I sort of started this project around when lockdown started. So I was working from home. And I came across Milton Friedman lectures on YouTube, and I just started binge watching them. And then at the same time, the Kassan Morcha was happening. So I was comparing what I was learning from those lectures to what was happening to Kassan Morcha, and things weren't quite adding up. And then as I got more into the literature around economics and learning about the different schools of thought within economics and all that sort of stuff, then I sort of realized like, how powerful of a tool economics is to analyze that situation and understand what's actually going on, and then provide some potential solutions that are grounded in reality. Um, so that's basically how I sort of started getting into this sort of subject area. And then a thing happened where I debated this. There's this talk going on by a guy called Professor Preetham Singh. He's a Oxford Brookes professor, and he's a Marxist. And he basically gave a talk on the Kasar Morcha. It was like on Zoom or something. And I reached out to him to actually debate him on socialism versus the capitalism concept. And at that point, I was already quite confident then. I heard quite a lot of the arguments at that point. We watched so many debates and debating myself with others. So that debate I had with that professor was quite one-sided. He found it very difficult to debate me back. And I had already heard most of his arguments. So what he said then was, because it's so difficult, he doesn't really understand what my position was, even though I understood what his position was. So then he told me to just write my views down on an essay or something. And I agree, that was a good idea. I'll do that. I'll write it down and we'll get back in touch. At the same time, I was debating with my personal Sangat as well, amongst the things as well. We have these vichara. So I was sort of writing down basically how I interpreted Sikhi and used that as a measuring stick when I was looking at economics, when I was looking at things like capitalism, socialism, these kind of things. And then that essay, I sort of got carried away, and it ended up being the Azadist Manifesto turned into a book. So that took about a year-ish to write. And then I started that Instagram page. Unless you haven't guys seen it already, it's this one, Azadism Official. I do recommend following it and stuff because a lot of the manifesto that I've written, all the sections are summarized on here. It's in a bit more like visual format. And then I've also got like extra vichar as well and other topics and stuff related to these things. So this basically became a platform in which I just discuss Sikhi and statecraft from a Sikh perspective. I don't proclaim to be an authoritative voice on this subject matter. This is purely all how I'm seeing things, my perspective on it. The same way if like Ratan Singh Bangu writes about Itihas and Sikhi and stuff in Pant Prakash, that's from his perspective. He's seeing that. Same with Suraj Prakash. Suraj Prakash is a really good example because you can feel Kavi Santokh Singh's prem for the Guru and Sikhi and stuff in that literature. So it's the same sort of thing. I'm trying to go on. Oh, we moved it. But yeah, so essentially it's the same thing. But well, not the same thing. Obviously, way better than this is the manifesto is. But this sort of same approach I'm trying to go with this. Like this is my understanding of Sikhi and applying it to my understanding of economics. And this is basically what's come out of that. But yeah, that's basically a bit of a background to me. I usually avoid giving too much details around like who I am or what kind of stuff, purely because the reason that my argument should hold more weight than the mouth that says it. Like I could be some like random guy from Japan or something and saying these things like, "Oh, couldn't even be a Sikh," but the argument itself should hold more weight than the person who says it. So that's why I try to separate the self, the individual, from the actual set of ideas. And the ideas are here to be adapted as well. So if any of you prove me wrong on things, because Azadism is essentially something I've made up, I had the freedom to change it, right? So I encourage disagreement and debate heavily in order to do that. And I have changed my position on certain things since writing the manifesto. One of them being blockchains. I used to be like a big fan of it. Now I'm not too sure, and maybe that's because I lost a lot of money in crypto. But yeah, there's those kind of things. So I've changed my mind over time, and we can get into some of that stuff later on if we want to as well. But yeah, that's a bit of a background. Jordan, do you want to? Should we start the actual content of the talk? Yeah.
You can definitely go ahead and start with the actual
Yeah, sure.
presentation.
So this is the website of Azadism that accompanies the manifesto, the Azadist manifesto. You can read the whole book on this website for free and download it as PDF and stuff as well. So Azadism, the sort of tagline I've got here is Sikh Statecraft and Economics. So Azadism introduces a framework to promote the flourishing and prosperity of existing and hypothetical states and nations. The Azadist manifesto introduces the political economic philosophy of Azadism as a Sikhi-based alternative to authoritarian ideals and central planning. So what I'll do actually, instead of going through the entire manifesto, I'm probably just going to give you guys a general overview of what it covers, and I'll do that first by actually just reading the definition of Azadism. So it's basically Azadism in one paragraph. So I'll do this, but don't get too hung up on the jargon right now. We'll expand that as we progress. So what is Azadism? Azadism as an economic and political system that encourages limiting the role of government to upholding the non-aggression principle and preserving property rights. This takes the form of four main roles, namely national defense, policing, justice system, and tax administration. The control over a nation's economy is gradually transferred away from the state control to the people directly, where both parts are adequately independent of each other. Initially administered under a decentralized castle confederacy of Misls, over time the role of government can be further reduced and replaced entirely by the private sector. Some of these words in this definition, alarm bells may be ringing in some of your guys' heads, depending on how you've your preconceived notions regarding these things. So what a lot of the manifesto does is actually go through and makes the definitions clear what a lot of these things are, in order to destigmatize a lot of it and actually put it in context of what it really means, which we'll get onto in a bit as well. So this next thing I'd like to read out is Azadism in 500 words. It basically covers the entire manifesto, what all the sort of main arguments are at a high level. Again, I do recommend reading the actual manifesto for a more comprehensive set of arguments, but this will give you a general overview of what is covered in the manifesto and what Azadism's philosophy is all about. So self-interest is a driving force for the vast majority of human behavior. Incentives should never be underestimated in their importance in influencing the choices people make. By getting the government out of the markets, the propensity for the state to create perverse incentives is drastically reduced. Respecting people's personal freedoms and the right for them to transact with each other freely and voluntarily ensures the self-regulation of markets. This way, no central planner is needed, as the market itself adapts to shortages and surpluses via the price mechanism and laws of supply and demand. The only time in which a state may need to step in is to ensure the protection of the market by punishing those who break the non-aggression principle. Again, this is just an important concept, right? The non-aggression principle. I'll define it again. So also I'll define it here. So this is the idea that anyone is free to live however they want to, as long as it does not impede the right for others to do the same. So the example I give in the manifesto for this is basically if a chemical company dumps its toxic waste into a river, and that river is used by a farmer to irrigate his crops, well, that farmer's not consented to have his crops poisoned, and the people who are going to eat those crops have not consented to be poisoned, right? So there is a jurisdiction now for the state to step in and rectify that situation. So what we can say is happening there is that chemical company has breached or broken the NAP. And so all the law in society then is based upon the non-aggression principle, and what the government's role is to do is determine where it's been broken and how to rectify and prevent and give justice to those who've been wronged by it. So this is the idea. Further to this, innovation best arises when private entities are free and unhindered to compete in an NAP-based environment. Not only does this advance human potential, but also protects the consumer from monopoly exploitation. Monopolies only exist with the aid of government through lobbying or other means of corporate welfare. Nationalization of industries is just another form of monopolization in which the state takes control of the production of goods and services. If you're not aware what a monopoly is basically, the literal meaning of a monopoly is basically one company controlling the entire industry. But usually today people use it more to refer to large market share organizations. So Ambani and Adani, these would be examples of monopolies. This inevitably leads to uncompetitive entities that are funded by taxpayer money, not voluntary transaction based on performance, as they are paid regardless of output or demand. Therefore, the price mechanism fails. And inefficiencies arise, as well as a complete collapse in innovation. Taxes are inherently unjust. It is state-mandated theft. Taxes under Azadism would be reformed initially before being removed entirely in the long term. Meanwhile, a negative income tax (NIT) system, or UBI, Universal Basic Income, should be implemented to provide the safety net instead of a corporate welfare state, a corrupt welfare state that perpetuates poverty and takes away opportunity. Minimum wages too should be replaced by an NIT, thereby putting pressure off small businesses and onto the state to provide living wages. Private charity replaces much of the social security function that the state formerly would have provided. The state must be reduced to these four functions initially to be classed as Azadist, and that's 1, national defence; 2, policing; 3, the justice system and courts; and the fourth thing is tax administration. From this, the state could gradually reduce its role and further limit itself out of existence in the long term. Alongside this, a gradual transition must occur away from taxes to a Dasvand-based system. Combined with a well-armed populace, a caste government is an ideal candidate to administer this process of handing power back into the hands of the people and away from tyrants. They could be organized as a decentralized Misl system made up of many competing groups, each with their own specializations and red maryade. Finally, contracts provide a method of private governance by allowing different groups to set their own laws on top of the NAP-based law system layer that is voluntary to participate in. Agal. So I had to put the Agal in because I said it's 500 words and that was 499, so I had to add that in. But yeah, so that's in 500 words what Azadism is, and I appreciate that's very dense if you're not already aware of a lot of these things to begin with. But the way we're going to sort of learn these concepts is by sort of reiteration and keep going back to them. So what we're going to do now is go back to the definition, read that again, but with the context that 500-word thing. So an economic political system that encourages limiting the role of government to upholding the non-aggression principle. Again, the non-aggression principle means the right to live however you want to live, as long as it does not impede the right for others to do the same, and preserving property rights. So property rights are a very important concept in general. So the whole way you can even have the non-aggression principle to be enacted in the first place is if you recognize that people own things. So, for example, if somebody comes into your house and starts stealing stuff or whatever, stealing stuff or whatever, then obviously they're breaching your private property rights. Sorry, give me a second. Yeah, so they're breaching your private property rights. So if you don't have a set of private property rights, you don't understand, okay, what is owned by this individual, what is owned by that individual, then what you'll end up with is a system of tyranny and oppression where anyone can just come in and take your stuff and you have no sort of grounds in which to protest that. So where's it gone then? So this takes the form of four main roles, namely national defence, policing, justice system, and tax administration. The control over a nation's economy is gradually transferred away from state control and to the people directly, where both parts are adequately independent of each other. Now that's crucial, that bit where I'm saying they have to be independent of each other. So people have this idea, when I say private sector, people tend to think of like greedy, fat, obese businessmen being private sector. But no, really what the definition of private sector is that part of the economy that is independent from the state. and the opposite to the private sector is the public sector. That is basically the public sector is the part of the economy that is controlled by the state. So what is the private sector? It's not just big companies. In fact, lots of big companies are no longer private because they collude with the state via lobbying, which is a part of a wider thing called corporate political activity. So as soon as you collude with the state, or you bribe the state, or you lobby the state, or the state is nationalizes your industries, that is no longer private. Now that is now public, or at least, at the very least, hybridized. So one good example of this is the American healthcare system. Everyone calls that a private healthcare system, but that's incorrect. It isn't a private healthcare system. The US government actually spends more on its healthcare system than the UK does, and the UK is meant to have a completely nationalized healthcare system. So the fact that the government funds it and has all these sort of schemes and influence within it, that diminishes its status as private. When the government has no say into it at all, or no influence at all, that is when it's truly private. So what are examples of that? Well, this right now, this organization of us in this Discord chat, this is a private effort. There's no government overseeing this or anything. Apart from obviously the Discord mods, but that would be a private government because you don't pay tax to them. It's all voluntary to participate here, unless they're all forcing you. But that's essentially what the difference between the private and the public sectors are. And it's very crucial to understand that because even the gurus themselves were private individuals. They weren't state individuals. They were absent. They were independent of the Mughal state, and they actually fought hard to maintain that distinction. And one of the best examples of that being is Guru Tegh Bahadur Shahidi, where he fought for the private rights for individuals to choose and live the lifestyles that they choose, not the one that the state tried to mandate upon them. Obviously, that being the Kashmiri Pandits being free to practice their form of Hinduism, right? So that's always remember that as well. Even Langar as well have a whole section in the manifesto devoted to that, where I say Langar is a private effort; it's not a public effort. And we have to really understand and get over these negative connotations of these terms, because if we're not accurate with our language, we won't be accurate with our solutions. And a lot of the reasons why we have so many efforts of misinformation, even within the Band, but also in society in general, is because people aren't using the words as their meaning correctly. And those words get polluted and then falsely attributed to other things. So one very good example of this is capitalism. So capitalism is basically is purely a system of economics where the private sector manages resources in the economy, not the state. However, people, when thinking of capitalism, they think of corporatism, where large businesses collude with the state or lobby the state, and they implement policies that are in their favor. That's not capitalism, because as soon as a company starts doing that, it loses its private status. So it's very important we get these terminologies and these language correct, because if we're not accurate with them, then you can't be accurate with your solutions. You have to define the problem first accurately if you want a good and relevant solution. If you're not understanding the problem, then how are you going to solve the problem? And the last part of this is the initially administered under a decentralized castle confederacy of Misls. Now, this is something that comes right at the end of the manifesto, and to be honest, I wouldn't like to go into it in too much depth because it requires a lot of preliminary knowledge to really appreciate what's going on here. So it's basically an alternative to democracy and dictatorships and this sort of thing. But to understand how it arises and how Azadism sort of tweaks it to sort of fix the problems that occurred with it last time, a lot of the manifesto, then section 1, 2, 3, and 4, keep outlining this concept of decentralization, competition, economic competition. And then by the time we get to the Misl section, you'll understand all the preliminary knowledge to appreciate actually how would that actually work in reality, and then account for some of the risks with it. But yeah, so we can go into it later on if you guys have questions about it. But yeah, the reason why it comes right at the end is because there's so much stuff you have to learn beforehand to get to that stage. Over time, the role of government can be further reduced and replaced entirely by the private sector. So again, yeah, so when I'm saying replaced entirely by the private sector, I'm saying the government phases away. You don't have a centralized government like how we have it now. So one thing I say in the manifesto is that people aren't used to a system where they don't have one government managing everything. It's because people have developed a Stockholm syndrome for government. So after thousands of years of being under the system of like either a monarchy or a dictatorship or a democracy, people don't know any better. Don't know what's the alternative. And we're in a unique position in history now where some of these things are now being conceptualized, but the people still need to get over that barrier in their heads. What does it mean to live in a society where there is no one central government? And by the end of the manifesto, we'll start visualizing what that looks like and how it can actually be quite realistic. But yeah, that's pretty much a high level overview of what Azadism is. What else have I got here? So at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions and answers. If that's enough for you guys to go off and give me some question and answer, that's fine. The questions are relevant, and I've got slides to visualize some of those things. But yeah, that's pretty much as an overview what Azadism is. It's an economic and political philosophy based upon Sikhi. So Sikhi is basically the measuring stick I'm using when I'm assessing these concepts. And Azadism is what I've labeled those concepts and packaged together. So yes, Azadism is basically an economic political system that prioritizes freedom of choice and minimal government interference in the society, and that what we believe is going to be the most conducive to progress and prosperity, and reduce the chances of tyranny. Yeah. So, any questions?
Okay, so if you, there's a few of them, I'll go with one by one.
Okay.
Right. The first question we got was, what can be done on an individual level for Khalsa Raj?
Right.
Like what can we do on an individual basis? Like once we know that we have the info and like okay, we want to do something, then what's
Okay.
the first step we should take, and like how can we go forward with that?
Yeah, so this is a good question. I had it a couple times actually so far as well since starting the project. The issue with this question is that um, is what this so Azadism, right, is a multi-phase project. So what we're going through right now is the phase one of this, which is the Prachar stage, where all I'm trying to do at this point in time is educate everyone on what Azadism is and sort of raise the level of discourse in the Banth regarding statecraft. Because right now, what we're doing as a Banth is the whole discourse around Azadi can be summed up in two lines. That's wow, we're oppressed, and wow, we need a state. But no one really goes beyond that much, and that's pretty frustrating. And that's the reason why I started this project as a way to try and answer those questions myself, and then present it to these guys who are doing the sloganeering. But as expected, they didn't want to have anything to do with actually filling in the details. They just want to do the sloganeering. But that's fine, whatever. I mean, it's not fine, but that is what's going on right now. But what Azadism phase one is trying to do is say, at least, are we on the same page with the vision before going on to how we do implement it? Because the implementation question is very different, and those sort of conversations should not be held publicly, and they shouldn't really be held that much, to be honest. What if you want to implement this vision? You should just really just do it and just show it through your actions. And this is what I want to try and do with the phase two of Azadism, which I'm planning on releasing publicly what that is later this year. But yeah, that's what can you do on an individual level. So I've mentioned this a couple of times through the posts on Instagram, because obviously that answer is not that satisfactory to most. Is actually just build wealth. So in today's day and age, right, that common saying you might have heard, money is power. That's never been truer. Because if you understand what money isn't just paper and metal coins in your pocket. What money actually represents is that if you pay someone to do something with that money, you trade the currency in your pocket for a particular product or service. You're communicating that I want labor to be diverted and resources to be diverted to fulfill this particular demand. Now, the more money you have, the more power you have to divert labor to fulfill your demand. Now, that sounds quite like sort of like, oh yeah, power hungry, whatever. But it really is, because that's what money is. It diverts power. So people in this world, again, this is one of the things an issue I have with the whole attitude towards Azadi right now, is that we're so fixated on trying to get a Sikh state, we're forgetting where power in the world really is. It's not with countries, or it's not just with countries, I should say. It's actually with corporations. You have corporations these days with more influence than some countries combined. Why is that? And some of these guys, like Jeff Bezos and whatever, they didn't start from like royal families or anything and inherited billions of wealth. They built it, and a lot of them had similar backgrounds to us. Now, you might disagree and stuff with them on how they behave and stuff now once they're billionaires and stuff, but it's undeniable that the reason why they've got a lot of influence and power in this world is because they gained a lot of wealth. And if you look at certain communities, like the Jewish community, why are they so overrepresented in various different sectors? Like even with the Nobel prizes, they're like 4% of the population, 0.4% of the population or something, but they make like 25% of the Nobel Prize winnings. It's because their community has understood where power is in the world, and they've geared their communities, and they've had a set of ethics and a set of values and stuff they've embedded in their families. That if we acquire wealth, we're able to change the world around us to be more in our more in accordance to our vision. And that's what really you as an individual can do as well. You have to gain and build wealth. But if you're going to do that, you have to be cognizant of the fact that your Sikhi has to be strong, and so that you don't fall into the to greed and attachment and like God, right? So to build wealth, you need two things, right? As a Sikh, you need two things. You need your Sikhi, you need to have a level of Bhakti, but you also need to have a level of understanding how the world works. To gain wealth in any society and throughout history is that you have to provide, you have to gain skills that people are willing to pay for. If you don't have, if you're having some skills, that's why when you go learn like programming or very specialist careers like engineering, etc., they're very specialist skills. Not everyone can do that. And when you're going to go to those fields and you go and you get higher up in those fields, your pay tends to get higher and higher as you become more specialized or you become a better experience because you're hard to replicate. And this is why in some of the top organizations, those people are making the most money and stuff, most wealth in those organizations are people who are being there for a very long time and they know the processes in that company in and out. So if that guy ever leaves, then the company's in a lot of has a lot of problems. So they incentivize him to stay by paying him a lot. And it's the same thing with business as well. So if you're self-employed as an entrepreneur, the only way you're going to be able to sell your product is if you're fulfilling some sort of need in society. So if you want, so it's actually part of the first section of the manifesto is self-interest, is that everyone's acting out in their own self-interest. They all care about their self-interest first. We're not living in Satyug, we're living in Kalyug, where Humme is the norm, right? That's the base level you start from. If you ignore that, then don't be surprised why you're not getting anywhere. So if everyone's acting out of self-interest, and even if somebody is greedy in the system, then the only way they can satisfy their self-interest is by providing something of value that other people are willing to pay for. And that's the core of any of this. Even as an employee, this is what you do. You trade your skills and your labor and your experience for a salary. And as an entrepreneur, you do the same thing, but you also collect other individuals of skills and you bring them together in order to solve a particular problem in society. And obviously, a lot of these problems may seem trivial to you, like the iPhone, right? Like what problem did Steve Jobs solve? Well, he actually catered towards many people's desires, and people were more willing to have an iPhone in their pocket than or like £1,000 of their money, right? So they trade that £1,000 for an iPhone or however much it costs, right? And that's essentially how you, as an individual level, how we as a band need to restructure ourselves in our thinking. That we need to understand that how does wealth get built? How do we acquire wealth? And then how do we make sure that our Sikhi is strong enough that we don't get corrupted by that wealth? So Maya is this tool, or you can be used by Maya, or you can use Maya, but it's up to your level of bhakti that determines which way it goes to. But yeah, that's what you can do on an individual level. Build your bhakti and then build your wealth, and then the opportunities start arising. On a Bantic level, so thing is with the Bantic level as well, you see a lot of these like Bantic organizations and leaders and representatives keep banging on about this idea of Ekta. Now, I've never been a big proponent of Ekta because I think it's very superficial for people to say, let's have these surface level compromises and get nothing done. If you had an organization or a business where at the top level of and the executive team of that, and they always just say, okay, let's have Ekta, no point disagreeing with each other, let's put the disagreements aside. Now you're right, that's fine, Ekta say. You'd never get anything done, right? Because you just surrounded yourself with the yes men. But what you need to make change is have a really hard reality check of where the bottlenecks are and how to solve those bottlenecks. If you don't know how to do that, you won't get anywhere. And we as a band are not getting anywhere because we're not holding our organizations accountable. And then we're just pretending to ignore deep disagreements with each other. And to be fair, a lot of these disagreements aren't that deep. It's just that people have attached their egos to things to such a deep level that they don't like being questioned, and that's very anti progress. So what can we do at the Bantic level is forget this ideal of Ekta and actually just build something first. Instead of having an Ekta first approach, have a results first approach. If you provide something of value again to the Sangha, to the Bant, right, then up be like naturally those people who recognize the value in that will join you. And the Ekta amongst those people, even though it's less people, will be far stronger than Ekta between many people if it's surface level compromises. And that's really the mindset I'm trying to approach Azadism with. I don't really care if the whole fund sort of backs this or not. I don't really need everybody to back it. I don't really need a lot of people to back it. I just need enough. And while it's good by now, that is happening. A lot of these people are coming forward, and people like yourselves are interested, and it's a good sign. But that's what we can do as a band. Is again to reiterate the point: build your bhakti, build wealth, and produce results, and that's how you start making changes. Any collective effort that might help. Yeah, that's pretty much it. So if you want to make a change, think on the individual level rather than the collective level. There's a really good quote actually. I'll probably post it on my Instagram later if I remember. But it's like there's this monk, right, and he was like saying, "I want to change the world. I want to change the world." And then he realized he can't really change his world. Then he said, "Okay, well, I'll change the country. I'll change my country." And then he realized he can't change his country. And he goes, "Okay, well, instead I'll just change my town or my community." He couldn't do that. And then I'll change my family. He couldn't change his family. And what he did was change himself. By changing himself, his family naturally saw that change, and then themselves changed, and then the family changed, and the community changed, and the community changed, and the country changed, and the country changed, and the world changed. You got to start from the individual level. Start with yourself, which is a lot what Azadism is about. Because the main thing Azadism isn't saying is like the society should be structured like this, the government should make this policy or that policy. Majority of Azadism is saying actually the government should leave people alone. Basically it's a fancy Azadism, and this sort of philosophy is a fancy way of saying just leave me alone. And when you leave yourselves alone and you focus on yourselves, then that's when the change happens. So hopefully that answers that question. Might be a bit long-winded, but yeah, that's my answer.
So I think you probably answered this, but so as you said, like building wealth, right? And then like get those skills,
Yeah.
that might be helpful, right? So I think that was the next question, that if that is the case, then what kind of skills or stream that you think would be needed for the Panth in the upcoming time, or people should invest their time or effort in?
Yeah, really good question. So if you look at the trends in society now, where are the most like the sort of like innovation and stuff happening? And a lot of that is in technology. So learning to program and code. So this isn't like as this is my personal opinion, but yeah, I don't think learning to code and program, like learning Python and stuff, it's never been easier to learn these things as well. The whole internet, all these resources. So at university, I studied accounting and economics. I didn't like either of those topics at the time. So I didn't actually become an accountant or an economist. I became a data analyst, and I just learned to code in my own time, and I learned the softwares. I got myself a job that paid very little in order to learn get experience, and then I worked myself up, and now I'm doing managed good by now, doing quite well. It's because I've learned that okay, there's a gap here. There's a demand is for data science and the data analytics skills. That's where the gap is. So that's where I geared towards my skills, and then I built it there. So that's one area. Data and in programming in general, software engineering is a very good field, and also fields anything to do with like science and innovation. To be fair as well, there's a growing industry of what's it called, space travel and these kind of like rocket scientists, or these kind of things. So there's a lot of these opportunities. You just got to go out and find it. So the one that I found was this whole like techie sort of side of things, but there might be other ones as well. But it's something that you have to find yourself. But in terms of what would be useful for the band, any of these skills would be useful for band. Whatever you do, be the best at it. Often what happens is, right, I remember I was feeling like this when I first started working, was that what the hell am I doing? I've got like 4 or 5 shafted under my like shirt here, and I'm wearing a suit, and I'm supposed to be out here fighting muggles. I'm here fighting spreadsheets, so obviously it's a bit disheartening. But you have to realize, right, that whatever you do, you've got to be the best at it. And when you're the best at something, you become irreplaceable, and then obviously your wealth will grow, but also your influence will grow. People come to you for advice, and they see that as reputable. And then by having a very visual Sikh in those positions, it's inspiring for others, and it's inspiring for your position amongst other society. It builds relevancy. So I did a post on my Instagram not too long ago about Sikhs are irrelevant. And I really recommend everyone to read it because it shows the cost of what happens if we become irrelevant as a community. You end up with having, like what happened with that Juggy Johar guy, is that he's been arrested, held without trial, and we've been protesting for how many thousand days now at some point, and nothing happens because we, the community, have very little relevancy. Nobody really cares to fulfill our demands. But if we get ourselves into positions where we ascend and permeate the system, Sikhs everywhere, we are the decision makers, we are the people who are crucial for the society to function, then our boycotts will actually mean something. And now, we Sikhs aren't in a position where we're not relevant in that level. We are actually quite successful as a community, but we need to combat narratives that saying progress is evil or like working in the Sagad is like anti-Sikhi or something like that. You've really got to understand that the game we're playing today requires relevancy. It's this whole idea of realpolitik. That's what you really need to do, and the skills you need to learn, and just be the best at what you're doing.
I think myself that post I have read through there. It's pretty informative. If you want to just give just a bit elaboration on like what exactly means when you say that Sikhs are not or Sikhs are irrelevant, and
Yeah,
specifically like like in a point where, as you already said that our community is pretty successful,
yeah,
but we're missing the part that people who are getting successful, um, on the way they're not as Panthik anymore, and
yeah,
they are more like, as you said, because of the bhakti, right? If there's not enough bhakti, then you will get corrupted by the system that you are trying
right,
to change.
yeah, yeah, 100%. I'll show you I'll show you the post. I'm putting it up here somewhere. I'll go through it actually if you want. Now, not like in too much detail. I do recommend to read it, but yeah, the idea of the post was that what do you mean by when I say Sikhs are irrelevant? Well, back in the day, you have like the things going into Delhi and they're like pressuring the Mughal emperor to like build a gurdwara here and that thing down, do that's right. We had such a sway and influence in the geopolitics of India and of the time. Our demands, what demands we made, were took seriously. That's not really the case anymore. Evidently, as I showed the Jaggi Singh Johar example and other things, right? But we're also lagging behind in terms of leading the world this century. So there's various sort of industries like the artificial intelligence revolution, the whole space travel, renewable energy, sciences, and even spirituality. You have so many of these like interfaith boards and everything going on. Like even recently in Harvard University, you've got like monks from the Advaita Vedanta tradition. Who are helping like these neuroscientists and top philosophers in grasping certain concepts about consciousness. Where are our lot doing that? That should be us. We've got far more superior philosophy than Advaita Vedanta. In fact, we got Bhagadashi themselves talk about critique of Advaita Vedanta. So we're not in the spaces where we should be in order to lead the world in this century, and that's very disappointing. And what's happening is that these world governments, like the US and stuff, there's one guy called Henry Kissinger. Many people don't know who he is, but some people do. But if you don't know, he's basically an American diplomat, and he's behind a lot of the foreign policy of the US. Very strategic mind, borderline evil guy, but it's undeniable that he's very influential. He sits behind a lot of the presidents and stuff. But yeah, so there's basically this interview he gets done with his biographer, and he basically just reveals how does Henry Kissinger think, and he thinks through world politics in this thing called real politics. It depends on your economic relevancy. If your country is not producing much economic value or doesn't have much political sway, you're not really relevant to the US in that much sense. So your needs and stuff are secondary to other things. So this is basically the things that are happening with our community right now. Because they're not producing that much economic value, we are individually, but not as a community. So we don't have a community, a collective demand to things that hold any sway. So when we boycott something, it's not like it makes a big difference. The government's like, yeah, well, so what if you boycott it? Like the whole boycott the police in Sikh Gurdwara in space and stuff now. Like fair enough, yeah, I get the motivation behind it, but it's largely ineffective. You can't leverage that as a strategy. Because for one, half the band don't even do it. There's only a few people that do that hold that boycott, and the police are gonna be like, well, yeah, so what if you don't want our services? It's just less work for us, right? So it's not very strategic. So this post basically then goes on to say that if you want to sort of get your interests met, you've got to appeal to the self-interest of others, and you got to, and that's very like counterintuitive to think about that. If I want something, I should go and ask for it directly and be direct for it. But not really. That's not how the world works. If you want something, you got to show the other person how is it in their benefit. So what can we do then? So you basically, to serve your own self-interest, you've got to serve the self-interest of others. The same way I was saying earlier about the market system, in terms of an entrepreneur providing something of value. The entrepreneur wants money, right? He doesn't want the products he's producing. He wants to give them away. He doesn't want to give them away for free. He wants money in exchange for it, right? So he produces something of value that people want, and then people want it, so they'll give up the money in their pocket for it. And the same thing we got to do with politics. If we want to do something in terms of making a change in this world, then we've got to offer governments and stuff something that's in their interest, whilst also furthering our own interests. And how did you do that? Well, then those are the conversations that should be had more privately than publicly. But that's the sort of thinking we need to be going about this. We can't just keep bashing our heads against things and face things head on all the time. These tactics don't work anymore. We're not fighting battles by jumping on horses and stabbing our problems away. You've really got to be strategic in this day and age, even more than before. You're fighting bureaucracies nowadays, not monarchies. You don't chop off the head of the leader and the whole like the system falls apart. No, you're fighting a hydra. You chop off one head, another one grows, right? So you can't attack it the same way. Very different way you've got to do. I mean, even in Maharaj's times, they would realize this. If you read like Jaditha Pakan Bani and stuff, you'd realize actually how strategic Maharaj is being. That you don't just fight problems head on. There's so many Sakhis around it. I'm going to be doing a little mini series of posts on Jaditha Pakan and these different Jadithas, showing you exactly what these Jadithas are and how Maharaj is giving you this lesson of if you're fighting head on things don't work, then try outflanking the opponent or trying a different way or do a bit of jiu-jitsu, right? Give it a little ground to take a lot later, right? So these are sort of tactics that Khalsa and stuff should really be implementing, but we're not. Our Pantic leaders and our Pantic organizations that just keep bashing their heads against things and then wondering why is there no change. And obviously me myself have actually offered them, okay, well, I'll give you some tactics and strategies. Let's sit down and think about how alternative we can do it. They don't want to hear it because what's happened now is people have attached their egos to it. Again, I mentioned earlier, and if people can't admit that they're wrong, and if you can't admit that you're wrong, then you can't change. If you can't change, then you won't get results. If you can't get results, then there you go. You're just stuck in the problem as we are now. So yeah, obviously. I'm not on the best of terms with National Sikh Youth Federation, so the rest of this post is basically just calling them out. So yeah, if you're interested, you can just read through that. But yeah, one of the things that the claims that they make is that if you work in the government, you're no longer a Sikh, and I think that's pretty ridiculous to reduce Sikhi to such a brittle level. And if you think about it, a lot of Guru Sikhs have worked in the government and with the government when it was strategic to do so, especially the Gurus themselves. It was one famous example when Mala sent Khalsa Forge to support Bahadur Shah in his army, right? Obviously, he's obviously still a Sikh, right? And obviously, they got this. The whole Mala and Jeet Singh would send Nahang bodyguards to the Nizam of Hyderabad, elite bodyguards as well, and obviously they would be working for the state. And this image here is an example of that guy, pictured then. Obviously, I was saying the post is like, imagine these guys going up to this guy and saying you're not Sikh, right? So obviously it's very watered down, very simplistic, and a very emotionally tied way of looking at Sikhi and very brittle. And if a Sikhi is not, the understanding of Sikhi is so broken to begin with, and obviously no wonder then a lot of their strategies are not having the impact that they think it should have. But yeah, essentially the end of this post is basically going that you have to use the right strategy for the right summer, the right time. Not that you can't use the same tactic every single time. When the situation changes, then you've got to change as well with the situation. You can't keep using the same tactics over and over again. So a lot of this nostalgia we're having for militancy and armed revolution, while Sikh, yeah, very cool, right? It's very inspiring and during their time, completely fair enough. That was the survival situation they were in. That was the solution they found, and thanks to them, we have now today space to maneuver, right? But we'd be idiots and it would be a insult to their legacy if we just go off and then repeat those same strategies. What we need to do now is understand the opportunities around us, leverage them, and build upon those sacrifices. Not just go blindly do them again for nostalgia's sake. And it's not even like nostalgia for your own actions. A lot of these guys advocating for it, they themselves never fought in those things. And they sit comfortably on the other side of the planet, advocating revolutions in other sides of the planet. It's a very, very faulty way of looking at the world. But the alternative, again, as I was saying, you use the right strategy for the right summer. And what was the last thing? Isolation versus infiltration. So back to that first question a little bit is like, how do you increase your relevancy? It's not through this policy of isolation of don't work for the cigar, don't work for the companies, don't wear a suit, don't become successful, profit is evil. All these things are anti-prosperity, right? And what you're doing is basically shutting off your community to anything. And even if you study economics and stuff, you quite quickly realize this idea of isolationism is very detrimental to the progress of your community. And there's quite a lot of examples of this where those societies that were located further inland tend to do worse than the societies were located on like rivers and shorelines and coasts and stuff like that, because they have harder access to trade routes, harder access to outside influence. And obviously, this is one of the reasons why Sikhi was so successful, is because it was situated on the border of the subcontinent of India, and then all the whole Islamic world and stuff. So it's basically a hotbed of ideas. But by isolating yourselves, and you don't get progress, right? So we need to not isolate ourselves. We need to infiltrate the system, infect the system. And I think what did I say here? I go, might not be in this post, but it's like this idea of you got to infiltrate it, assimilate within it, and then ascend it. And by doing more people with a Bantic background and stuff in those positions, then you have a far greater level of influence and relevancy in order to make changes. Yeah, so what I say here is like, wherever field you're in, get to the top, right? Win the Nobel Prizes, become the CEOs, invent and innovate new technologies, right? There's nothing stopping anyone even in this Discord chat to becoming the next Elon Musk or the next Jeff Bezos. Nothing stopping you lot, right? But what is stopping you lot is attitude saying that making money is evil or making profit is evil and that kind of stuff. That thing will stop you having success. And there's a really good quote where I can't remember who said it, but basically it was the idea that the disdain for money is a ploy to keep the poor people without money and the rich people with money. So if you're going to test this, then
Yep.
that's what's going to happen.
Anji. Anji, I think that's an amazing analysis, specifically on this point.
Yeah.
The other, the other question specifically with the problem, I would say, like maybe there's a solution for this. Like specifically when we talk about infiltration, right? For example, like there's a person who's a Sikh, and he thinks like we should do something with the Panth, and he follows this route of like infiltrating a system, which means like he goes in a corporate world, strives towards it, gets a better position, and while he is getting there, right,
Yeah.
somewhere in the middle, he's now in such a position where he's also trying to like impress other people, like his colleagues or maybe higher ups as well, that
Yeah.
he's reluctant to put forward the Panth Soj or like to
Mm.
speak about Panth, right? There's
Yeah.
2 3 questions that have came that are pretty similar to each other. Like for example, like Ajay Banga, right? He became like
Oh yeah.
I think the new for example, world, I think something, I
President
forgot
of the
what
World
he was.
Bank or something. I think he was.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
then like we have Daljit, we have Rupi Kaur, we have other these main big um people who are known as Sikhs, but like just like so-called like just for the name of it, right? Namesake Sikhs, and like well, like just that's what people call them, right? So then
Yeah.
like all this different strategies, and so the first question would be like, what would what how do we stop, or what can a person do like when they're going to this gun, if their mindset is to infiltrate the system,
Mm.
but how to not get corrupted by the system at the same time, right? Because
Yeah.
there's always that danger that lies there.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a very valid concern because you do you get some people who are Bantic, right, get to those positions, and obviously I know some of these guys, and they're very like a lot of love for Priya for Sikhi, but they get fed up because they themselves then get pushed to the side by so-called Bantic organisations themselves. That's one element, but another element is that Sikhi has been watered down a lot since colonial times. So a lot of people's understanding of Sikhi is very distorted. Now, thankfully, this is changing, and a lot of efforts are now as this. A lot of information is going online. Where this new generation of Sikhs, if you compare to your own parents' generations, right, the level of understanding of Sikhi has changed a lot. Like even just now in this Discord chat, like how many of you guys have joined, right, to listen to these kind of conversations, and who even joined the Sikh Discord in the first place? There's quite a lot of people who have this ambition and respect and Statecraft for Sikhi, right? So it is changing. We just got to have a long-term mindset about this, where it will happen. But there's also, I don't want to say too much, but this is going to be one of the main focuses around the phase 2 of Azadism, because as I said earlier, yeah, wealth, money is power, but that's not the whole equation. You need three things in order to have power. That's wealth, that's an idea, a plan, or a solution, right? And the last thing is coordination. If you don't have a sense of coordination or an ability to coordinate that wealth effectively as a band together in order to plan and stuff, you won't really get solutions. You'll have you won't even have power. All you have is an illusion of power. Now, the Jewish community have been successful in this because they've been able to band around collective trauma. So if you look at their whole the idea of the Holocaust, and they've been obviously between us, we'll stick together regardless, right? That you'll buy from a Jew first rather than buying from outside the community. There's a stat or whatever that's going like in the Jewish community, $1 circulates 10 times before leaving the community. It's these sort of things that we need to start replicating as part of the Sikh community if we want to see this. And we need to be able to say, like, those people who get into those powers, we as the rest of the Bantu provide a support system for them. That if they start being Bantic, then they've got the rest of the Bantu to fall back on. Now, again, I don't want to go into that too much because then it starts going to what the phase 2 of Azadism will be. I don't want to reveal that too much yet.
So that was the one part of the question, and the other part was that now the Sikhs who are already there, right?
Yeah.
Well, maybe they don't have the Panthis, but how should we look at them, right? Should we be proud of their achievements? And maybe they're not like Sikhi achievement; they're more like in their own, like Daljeet, went to that Coachella concert, and like then
Oh
Ruti
yeah.
Kaur is doing something, and that this guy becomes a CEO of something, right?
Yeah.
But we don't see them as Panthik, right? Because they never push anything Panthik forward, or they don't talk much about Panth or like Sikhs, right?
Yeah.
How should we be like publicly like talking about them, or like how should we go forward with, like, maybe if there's a way to like make them feel more inclusive and maybe get them to do something for the Panth? How should we go forward with the people who are already in the like mainstream, already infiltrated the system, they're part of the system? How do we look at those people, those Sikhs who are already there?
Yeah, so I had the perspective on them. A lot of them, it's the same way you look at everybody, really. You have to look about a case by case basis. In terms of like, every one of these guys are individuals now. They're all on their own personal journey with Sikhi, etc. as well. So you really got to judge them individually. But in general, as an individual from the outside or from the rest of the band looking at them, you got to take the exact same thing we're taking from every other human being on this planet. You got to take the good and leave the bad. So if somebody's become like the president of the World Bank, we'll then see that as a form of inspiration. That yeah, okay, somebody looking like me can actually end up in that position like that. And then you can use that then as a motivator to also similarly to get yourself there. Because yeah, you might be able to like criticize their sort of commitment to Bantic causes, but that only should over bolster your own commitment to Bantic causes. It goes, well, okay, if he's not doing it, then I'll do it myself then. And that's essentially what I've done with Azadism here. Like if all these Bantic orgs keep doing these slogans and stuff and don't want to answer how a Khalistan actually look like, well then I'll do it myself then. So this idea of like, okay, I'll do it myself, it needs to be more prevalent amongst us. That's how we should see these people. But yeah, I mean, we were discussing this on the Telegram actually recently, where we were trying to figure out, okay, well, how do you actually look at Arjun, because the World Bank isn't exactly this. One guy was saying, you don't get to that position by staying clean. And like, yeah, it might be right. It might be some sort of like, it might be corrupt as how the guy is, but just take the value from that. Like, okay, what is the positive mythology we can have from that compared to but also be wary of, okay, maybe he has done certain things to get to that position that's unethical. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's probably how I'd answer that. You just look at them individually by individual, and if you don't think they're doing a good job, then do it yourself. Yeah.
Well, and because I'm from Toronto, so in Canada, right, we have Jagmeet Singh here, right?
Oh yeah.
So he, lots of Sikhs criticize him, right, because of lots of things that he's pro LGBTQ, he's pro other stuff that
Right.
might not align with Sikhi, right?
Okay. Yeah.
And on publicly we all like we have seen many Sikhs who just started like bashing him a lot, right? Saying like, yo, this guy is crazy. We don't even he's not even a Sikh anymore, right? That
Right.
no, we don't have nothing to do with him. This guy is, just like a Gora and like a Sikh body, right? And
Yeah.
all that other stuff that people publicly are like Sikhs are already like condemning Sikhs publicly, right? So
Yeah.
how do you look at this perspective? Like person, like we agree that he definitely has those traits where like he's not very panthic, and he also supporting things that are not Sikh related, but also like he is in a position where we can benefit from him. So how do we look at
He is.
that?
Yeah, so this is something I'm guilty of myself. I even got a post on Azad as one of the early ones where I just rip into his political philosophy because he is a socialist, right? And I'm pretty anti-socialist, so I don't really like a lot of his policies. But the reason why I don't chase him and similar politicians as much as I was initially planning to, because even in the UK we got like what's his name, Pandesi, right? You got the conservative guy as well, right? I can't remember what his name is, but you got a bunch of these politicians. You have to understand that the game they're playing, right, requires a sense of sensitivity of what they're doing, what they're saying, and what's going on around them. We're not really, as the rest of the band, privy to the sort of strategies they've got. Because as a politician, right, your main thing is to be strategic. And if you're not strategic as a politician, you won't really get anywhere. And these guys, to get to the positions that they have got to, especially Jagmeet Singh, he has to have a strategy in place. And now that may include being a sellout from our perspective on certain issues. So I see him as one, well, I used to at least, on economic issues. I think he vastly misunderstands how economics works, and it's reflected through his policy proposals. However, to even have the image of someone in that position in one of the major economies and major countries of this world is itself quite promising. What my vision would be is having Sikhs in every party. You'd have Sikhs in the Conservative Party, in the Labour Party, and all these different parties, right? And just permeate it. So regardless of who's in power, you'd always have Sikh representation. And now the other issue is this: that because it's so isolated, it's not, in Canada's a bit different. You guys are a bit changing this, but in the UK, there's not that many Sikh MPs and stuff, politicians. When you start having Sikh faces everywhere in the institution, it becomes a more comfortable environment in which to speak to Sikh issues. And it's natural for them. For we can say, okay, well, you're tying a bug and stuff, like be a Bahadur and you're like one against Savalak and all that kind of stuff. But when you're in that position, and you've got all these pressures and stuff, you've got to feed your family, you've got your own career to think about and all this kind of stuff, right? Then yeah, that self-interest motive starts hitting, and it shouldn't, especially if you're a Sikh representative. The whole point you tie the bug in the morning is that you destroy your self-interest for others, right? But we can't force that on anyone else. But yeah, it's a delicate thing because obviously I do disagree with Jagmeet Singh heavily, as I do with Tandesi and all these other politicians on their policies. But we still need them. And we've got to understand they're playing their own games as well that we don't have all the information about. So yeah, it's a pretty hard answer that.
Anji, because
Oh, actually, I'm mentioning something else as well. The whole idea that people say he's not Sikh anymore. Um, it's the same thing of having the issue with these Bantik organizations saying like, okay, you do this, you're not Sikh anymore, right? The word Sikh, right, comes from the Sanskrit Shishya, and what Shishya means is a disciple of a guru, right? So we have our guru, and we as Sikh are a Shishya of that guru. Now, each disciple of that guru does not automatically mean the completely embodiment of that guru and all the teachings of it. Some people are further away, some people are a bit closer on that path. If somebody's a Sahajdari Sikh, right, he's still a Sikh. So how I see Sikhi and how I see somebody as being a Sikh is anybody who takes inspiration from the Guru to whatever level and whatever degree. I do not see Sikh as a separate community or a band on its own, or a Gaum on its own. What Sikhi is a band, a path, right? So even as a Muslim or a Hindu or a Buddhist or a Christian or whatever, you can follow Sikhi and be a Sikh in a sense. But what you can't be is a Muslim and a Khalsa. The Khalsa is the religion element of Sikhi. So there's Sikhi, the underlying culture in which anybody can follow the Guru and take inspiration from the Guru to any extent. But then you have the Khalsa within that is a unique expression of Sikhi. But it's not the only expression of Sikhi. It's the most predominant one. that we visually see today. But there's traditionally been four Sampardas. There's been the Nahan Khalsa, there's been the Udasis, there's been the Nirbale, and there's been the Serapanthis, and there's a bunch of others as well, right? Over time, and like even now, modern day, you can say there's different sort of Sampardas in terms of like the Ksalis and whatever as well. But those are like commitments to different paths and reds within Sikhi. But Sikhi itself is far more universal, and we need to be very careful in making Sikhi some kind of exclusive thing. So yeah, these guys are still Sikh, even if I disagree with them. They're definitely still Sikh. But what I'd say is that, okay, is that pro or anti Khalsa? That's where the conversation I'd have.
Anji. So so in that perspective, right?
Yeah,
So like for example, doesn't have to be Jagmeet Singh, but anyone, right, who is in a political party, definitely, like because they are in that position, and because the system is so corrupt that the whole point of democracy is the majority people like want to impress the majority, right? So they're going to do all the stuff that majority likes, right?
yeah,
And Sikhs has always been in minority, so definitely this most of the Sikh principles would not align with the person who's trying to impress the majority, right?
right.
But it could be, as you already said, that we don't know them individually, so maybe there's definitely somewhere that they do consider them as Sikhs and probably want to follow those principles, but in the public,
Yeah,
they do want to show this face that they're inclusive, or we accept everyone, and then all that other stuff that might or not align with Sikhi, but
yeah,
they do need it because the system is made that way. Democracy is all about that, right?
yeah,
So I think what I would say, and maybe you can correct me with this, right, that when they do good stuff, like appreciate them, and they do bad stuff, tell them this is bad, but don't just start condemning our own people in front of all the Gores that they're Sikh, we don't even consider him as Sikh, or you know what, he's just he's not part of our community, we don't even like him, and stuff like that.
yeah. Yeah, I'm not too sure because there's a it gets tricky because everything nowadays is so publicly. So how do I like, for example, me, right? So I called out the what's his name, Shiru, in it, like from National Sikh Youth Federation, because the guy's been he's been very anti-caste in his behavior, right? Um, but how would I then call that out without that being accessible to the entire public, right? Um, Obviously, I've given the avenues in which we can discuss that and handle it privately, of which he's rejected every single time. Hence why I did it
Mm,
publicly. But then we need to be less scared of sometimes the public opinion. Turns out, okay, what's the Gora gonna think, or what's a Muslim gonna think about this? Sometimes, right, it's actually quite a good thing in terms of showing that we as a community are very critical of even our own. We don't put ourselves we don't protect our own if they're doing the wrong. We're very principle based. If you're doing something wrong, we'll call it out regardless of what you look like or who you are or where you belong to.
mm,
And that is a good attitude to have in general. But I do understand the alternative perspective that sometimes, right, some of us lot don't have any chill in how to approach this, right? There is a way to critique people with respect, and a lot of that doesn't really seem to transfer over to a lot of people, and especially a lot of people doing this is online. And then obviously when you're online, you're anonymous. You can say what you want. So that's that issue as well. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's that big of an issue, really. I don't really think it's that big of a deal, to be honest.
mm.
Yeah,
And so the idea where this question is coming from is where it's like, how can we make them work for Panth, right? So
mm,
like, if we keep blashing them in the public, right, and then sometimes they will say, okay, I don't even consider myself a Sikh anymore. I'm going to do my own thing, right?
yeah,
How can we use them? You can literally use them like to help Panth grow, and maybe like make them feel like welcome in the gurdwaras, and let them know, okay, what, like how you talk about diplomacy, right? Like how we can
yeah,
give put our needs there, and like that, you are in this position, you can definitely help us out,
yeah,
this is what Panth need, this is what 639 need right now, can you help us, right?
yeah.
And stuff like that.
Yeah. So yeah, I think you've just answered it yourself. So yeah, it's being cognizant of the fact that if you want them to do something, be very clear what it is. So if you want them to do like a certain thing for the band, then form a plan. Like write it down. Right, like this is exactly what you want to do. This is the problem. This is the solution I'm proposing. This is how it will solve it. This is the details, and this is where I need your input from. This is your help from. Right, and then you should be able to then present that to them. Now, this is something that I'm doing now with the phase two, and thankfully, Maj Gibban, I've been able to get access to some of these individuals. They're not celebrities, whatever. They're different. They're like more towards different sectors, right? But they're very successful in their fields. But because I've produced a plan, a detailed one that I can present to them, almost pitch it to them as if I'm an entrepreneur, they're far more receptive to it. And you'd be surprised that a lot of these guys at that position, they don't want to be anti-Bantic or whatever, right? A lot of them just don't have a clue what's going on, and they themselves need guidance. So we sometimes falsely attribute that they actually are all put together as they are. But if you have to go with them, approach them with humility, because obviously you need something from them, then you create a partnership in a sense of that. But you have to produce something of value. You have to produce something of detail and not be vague. The number one issue we have as a band is we're too vague. Like the whole Khalistan thing is a very vague notion. When you ask a Khalistani, okay, how would it work? How would it look like? How would the economic policy work? How would the governance structure be formatted? How would this work? How would that work? They start struggling very heavily. But if you come to them, if you come and produce a plan, a very detailed one, okay, this is where I need your input. This is where I believe you'll be very useful in, and this is where it'll be your benefit and our benefit and the band's benefit. Then that's the sort of approach you need to approach with this. But yeah, I mean, it's very vague to say like, okay, how do we get these guys to help the band? Help the band with what exactly? Like increase education or like fund schools in Punjab or whatever? Like even that to say that is vague, right? So let's use that Punjab school example, right? Okay, cool. You got this idea to fund schools in Punjab. What are they going to do? Just give you the money and then just hope you do it? No, you got to produce a business plan. Okay, who's going to source the construction of it? Who's going to be the teachers? Okay, we've interviewed this person, this person, this person. We think they're good at this subject. We're going to get them on board. So you have to produce an entire plan. When you have a plan that's detailed, like a business plan, then it's far easier to present it to these individuals, and then you'd probably be surprised at how willing they'd be to help you.
Yeah, I think that's really a great idea. I think definitely, yeah, if we have a proper plan, then
Yeah,
definitely like they will have, and then we will know where exactly their expertise is needed,
yeah.
and they will also know have a clue. Okay, this yeah, I can definitely help at this specific part,
Because
right?
you got to sell a vision to him, right? Because
Yeah,
is that what's that guy's name? Is it Denzel Washington? He goes like, "Oh yeah, dreams without goals are just dreams," isn't it? Like, there's a difference between a dream and a goal or a vision, right? You got to produce like objectives and have like smart targets and stuff, right? That's the stuff when you start getting things done. If it's just vague slogans, then yeah, don't be surprised nothing happens. Which is what Khalistan is at the moment, right? You go to the rallies, then it says Khalistan's in the bad. Well, then obviously there's no Khalistan because there's no detailed discussion of how you'd make that Khalistan, how it'd run, who would be governing it, that sort of things. You got to go away from sloganeering. You go towards details and plans and systems and think that way.
yep. Um, so the other question that came up, I think already you mentioned a bit about it, that the Jewish community and how that $1 runs 10 times and then goes out of the community.
Oh
So
yeah.
the question was that what's your views on Jewish community and the control they have over corporations, and also if you can talk a little bit like how Israel like and how that had that happen, and should we go that route, and like how do we can like basically get educated from the Jewish community on what stuff they do.
Um, yeah, the Jews are a good case study, and we as Sikhs can learn a lot from them. Yeah, I think I mentioned it before quite a bit, but with the Israel thing in particular, should we go down that route? I'm not too sure. Um, Israel's been quite successful through a variety of metrics, right? Considering where it is and the challenges it faced, it's done very well. However, is it an ideal? I'm not too sure if it is. Now, Azadism has a slightly different way of approaching these things, and which Israel did inform how I thought about it. But again, I think that's probably more phase two and perhaps even phase three and four stuff. That probably won't go into it now. But yeah, there is a lot you can learn from Jews, and I think from conversations I've had, Jews are actually quite willing to talk about these things with you respectfully as well. If you can find them, very rare. There's more Sikhs than Jews. Most people don't know that. There's more of us lot than Jews than there are Jews. But um, but yeah, there's a lot you can learn from them, especially their value systems. In terms of how do they run their families, how do they share inheritance, right? So in our community, we don't really have this culture of inheritance the same way we have the Jews have it in terms of like when a Jew dies in the West, or these successful Jewish communities die, they not only give like quite a large sums of money to their children, but also their nieces and nephews and this sort of thing. So wealth cascades down throughout their community a lot. So in the course of your life as a Jew, you tend to get massive like payouts now and again. As your family members, like older family members, die, so that's created a safe level of safety net in their community now, where the youth in particular have less of a mental barrier at starting their own businesses and being entrepreneurs, because they know they've got like family wealth and that system of family in which to fall back on. I think we Sikhs are a little bit behind on that, but we're also getting to a stage where we'll start to build that, I think, as well, naturally, which is good to see. There's a lot of this thing as well. I don't want a lot of what I said to be very pessimistic as well. I'm actually quite optimistic about the way we are going as a community, despite how critical I am of it a lot of the time. We do have to be a bit patient, but if we want to accelerate our progress, we've got to learn of other communities. Jews are a very good example, and there's quite other communities, different like sort of subgroups within Christianity that's quite useful to learn from. There's a really good podcast run by this Jew who interviews different members of their community on like wealth and investing and stuff like that. There's a really good one that I listened to recently, and the guy wrote a book about, it's called like the 10 reasons why like Jews are rich or something like that. And it's very good. I'd probably, again, you have to remind me or something, but I'll post it in my Telegram chat or on Instagram. But I'd really recommend reading that. It just goes into like the Jewish perspective and how they use their Shabbads, like their equivalent Shabbads, right? Their Torah to justify their behavior in terms of like, okay, we're using this passage here to conceptualize how we're going to do this in the business world, right, or that. So yeah, he's very good in terms of breaking that down and where that source of inspiration comes from. Yeah, I do really recommend that.
Yeah, personally, feel free to share it with me, and I'll share it with everyone here.
Yeah, perfect. Yeah.
And the next question, I think you already had a post on this, is about all this Sikh narrative, info war, technology, VPN, social media. Like, what's going on with the whole, since this movement started in Punjab recently, the narrative was all controlled by these IT cells from India. That
Yeah.
they were blasting different comments on different posts.
Yeah.
They were like, like all the narrative was created by them because they had paid people 24/7 working to
Yeah.
set up this narrative, right? So
Mm.
what do you think? So how? So maybe you can talk more on this info war and like what's going on with this and how can we do something about it?
Yeah, this is crucial really, because this is where the battlefield, but one of the battlefields is really at right now. It's not head-on combat warfare. It is really information warfare, where the lie is on. The way we're going to tackle this, right, is to actually start leveraging the same tools they use against us, against them. Now, this is something I've been mapping out behind the scenes as a separate thing in terms of creating a sort of Sikh IT cell. There's nothing stopping us from doing the same thing, and there's a lot of different avenues in which you can take that IT cell in terms of infiltration of different groups. You got to remember, a lot of these guys who are nationalists aren't the same sort of demographic we are. So we're a bit more of a younger population, right? Who are interested in these topics. But a lot of the guys who are the nationalists tend to be like older generation, like boomer generation, right? It's not that savvy, so it's quite easy then to infiltrate some of their groups and sort of subvert it. And that sounds pretty. That sounds pretty like pretty off, but like I'll show you that the way I've written it down and stuff in my notes is a bit different. But like I'm not sure. I'm trying to figure out how much to say because obviously it's a public thing, right? But maybe that's something later this year. I'll expand a bit more on and how we can probably set that up, and have sevadars and stuff, but also leverage AI like the Chat GPT's API and stuff you can get, and you can just train the Chat GPT stuff or train your own language models with machine learning to automatically go through Twitter and just bombard different accounts, or and have some conscious efforts as well. So if you know some like nationalists, pretend to be a nationalist, gain their trust, and then the rest is up to your imagination, right? But there's a bunch of things you can do. But obviously, I'm not going to reveal it here so openly. Maybe it's something I'll try to sort out later this year if I have time.
Sure.
But yeah, that is something we should be equally fighting back with on the same level.
And the next question is about I think you already answered the first when you started with the ekta and striving more towards creating some wealth and creating something that is useful and then go for ekta.
Yeah.
But basically the question is what arguments to put forward for organization or jathebandis to get them together on one stage and have a collective panthik efforts. So what arguments or like how can basically we convince them or how can they come on the same platform?
Yeah, I think you already mentioned it, right? So it's actually just producing something of value that they themselves want to come and work to you with. So this is happening with Azadism now. So certain organizations are now getting in touch with me in order to like collaborate and work together on certain things behind the scenes, which is quite good. I like that a lot because some of them are quite large. And then I've obviously got the phase 2 and stuff, which I'm wishing to work with them on. So we've got meetings and stuff planned to do that. But in terms of like in general, I wouldn't worry about it too much in terms of getting everyone on one stage with Bantegetta because we get people on one stage now, right? We have a lot of these Banting meetings, and you can have a whole sub with the cars. So you can have like a million people turn up to one of these things if you want, right? But ultimately, unless you're producing something of value, a detailed plan, accountability, and these sort of like actual real strategic meetings, they're just PR efforts, right? And they're just a lot of people getting around and just pumping their own egos. I don't think that's going to be very productive, to be honest. I don't think Sabbath Cars, as how we do it now, is very productive as it is. Like you get everyone together into one spot and you announce a bunch of like mate or whatever, and everyone does like a clapping contest. So like everyone shouts at Jakarta to express agreement. That's a very faulty way of determining agreement and disagreement because the only guys are going to come up anyway to those things are people who agree anyway. And then how do you measure disagreement? You can't really, right? So it's like it's an even worse way of doing democracy without a ballot box system. So how do I envision the alternative for Sabbath Khalsa? It's probably how we used to probably do it back in the day with the Misls, right? Not everybody would come and do this big Bantic general election. What you'd have is people actually working on the issues, coming together to coordinate better amongst themselves. How do we solve this problem together? Okay, I'm working on this. What are you working on so we don't clash? Or I'm working on this. What are you working on? Maybe we have some scope to work together on this. That's what I call a Sabbath Khalsa, not these big fanfares of what we're doing now and then releasing these random statements and we're giving authority to organizations that really don't deserve it. The only organizations and people and representatives that deserve a level of authority is the Khalsa, right? For the Sikh, the Khalsa is the Guru Panth, the Guru Khalsa Panth. When the Maharaj gave the Guru Gaddi to the Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj, he also gave it to the Guru Khalsa Panth, right? And that's very clear in our literature and Itihas as well. But people seem to forget that, and we go into this leader finding mode, and then because we're so gone down this sheep route, we're all like buying. When one guy goes by, everyone else goes by with them. Like, this is my concern with Amrit Bal Singh. Like I rated a lot of what he did. I really respected it. But the exact thing I thought was going to happen has happened. He's come out of the scene and everyone's come back into this leader finding mode. But when are you actually going to use that awareness to do something yourselves, or are you going to keep using that awareness to try and find a new leader now to raise more awareness? It's just a cycle going on and on again. I did a post on this. So a lot of these band get the band orgs together and have one stage of band ekta. You only should have a stage if you've got something relevant to say. And the truth is, a lot of these guys don't have anything relevant to say. It's the same old slogans that have been going for decades, and none of it's strategic. What you should have is a strategy meeting that's more private. It doesn't have to be that public, and the results should speak for themselves. Every 6 months, get together and say, okay, last 6 months, what did we do right? What did we say we were going to do in the last 6 months? Did we do them? Yes or no? Why didn't we do them? Okay, good. What things did we do well? Okay, good for that. Give praise to that. Okay, what we're going to do the next 6 months? We'll meet back up here again. We don't do that anymore, and that's a very big shame. But now that it's like obviously with the Zardas and stuff, and the conversation I'm having with certain organizations, we'll be doing that, and that will be what I consider be a Sabbath Khalsa amongst the Khalsa, not this big PR stunt.
I think that's great. The next question is more towards whatever we were talking about, like making something of value, getting more education and like, building wealth and like programming and all the other stuff, right? It all comes down to, like first is, you have to be educated to do all that stuff, right?
Mhm.
So this is specifically because this was my question because we in Canada here we have like a group where like Singhs are trying to educate kids back in India, specifically kids who don't have resources to get
Mhm.
education, specifically kids like under like before the 12th grade, like who are kindergartners, and even further on, like their parents can afford tuition, right?
Yeah,
So we have these two different organizations that are working really closely with the parents there, and they're doing a really good job.
yeah,
And like I personally know things who actually went to India and verified all these organizations and stuff they do, and they think they're doing a really good job, and they actually are doing some ground level work,
yeah.
right? So we're putting all this money and efforts toward educating these kids, right?
Mhm.
But now the concern that some things brought up was that okay, perfect, like we're giving them education, but again, like like they they're getting education from these all these other Hindu schools, right?
Mhm.
Even though that one of the organization did have built like a school, like a Sikhi school, right, where like
Yeah,
they're teaching about Sikhi, and they're also like teaching Santhya and other stuff that will help them in like a spiritual journey, plus giving them academics as well,
yeah.
right? So the question here was that what can
Mhm.
already seen all this trend going on that everyone just gets educated, comes outside, leaves Punjab, right?
Mhm.
And some of them might get corrupted, some of them like might not even, so out of those 100 people that we're trying to educate, there will be like one or two who would actually do something with the plant that will have the switch, and the other 90 people will probably, like get the education, but like do their own thing. They're also going to come outside, and rather than building value in Punjab, they will
Yeah.
also just migrate.
Yeah, this is a very good question. So, and I think you've answered it yourself again, but where you said if it's 100 people, okay, we have to do a survey, we don't really know that, but if you get 100 people and only one or two of them end up doing something for the band, that's brilliant because each one person is worth 250,000, right? That's a serious thing. We don't have to rely on the fact that everyone will do something bandig. Yeah, someone might be corrupt, someone just might not really care. But that's really down to the rest of us in terms of those who do care, right? What value are we providing for these people to be incentivized in order to help the band? And again, if you provide a detailed plan, you'd be surprised how much people actually are willing to actually invest time and stuff into it, that were previously not. And it's something I've realized through starting this Azadism project, right? Many people who before who were anti-Khalistani, who just didn't really see a point in it at all, um, came across Azadism, and then they reached out and said, actually, you've changed your mind on the feasibility of such an idea, or even reforming existing systems, right? That's the way you do it. You got to show people a. It's the same. It's the same thing that happens in business again, right? There's so much again you can learn from just business principles, and that's marketing, right? You got to show people a vision, a detailed vision, and how their participation in it makes a difference on a deeper spiritual level. It's the same thing Maharaj themselves would do, right? By showing people how it would benefit them. There's so many appeals to self-interest in Barney itself, and I mentioned a few examples of this in the manifesto itself, right? You've got to always make sure what's in it for them. If it's just to go like, all right, help the band so we can celebrate another Godwara and we can get some some half asleep Gyani to sit there and read Bart all day, then yeah, probably that's not very incentivized, right? But if you say, okay, well, help the band now, and then we'll set up a Misl system in which we can go around and fight warlords in Africa, well then suddenly that becomes a far more interesting proposal, right? Maybe you want to participate in that, but that's the way you do it. You got to find it. You got to, as the band itself, who wants something to do, wants other people to help contribute to your cause or your band, right? You got to show them how's in their benefit and what exactly they can do. If you don't have those things, you won't be able to do it. Yes, so you're right. Only a few people will end up doing something bante because only a few people in society ever use their own initiative. Most people are sheep. I mean, I'm saying that lightly. That is just the truth of the matter. Most people on this planet follow others because it's comfortable to follow others. It's difficult. It's uncomfortable to use your own brain. But when you start using the brain, even though the risk is higher and the hardship is greater, the fall of that, the outcome of that is far greater. dubbed it, there's a crisis of meaning right now. People are not finding meaningful ways to live their lives, and this is leading to general degeneracy. So, what is the solution to this? Is provide meaning in your life, and a banth, a religion, historically for thousands of years has been that thing that provides meaning in your life. But now we're becoming so far away from it because the religions, to be fair, and it is a fair criticism of religions nowadays, they're not providing anything of that much value to many people. You go to a Gurdwara now, for the vast majority of people, their Gurdwara experience is boring as hell. Like even to listen to Kata, right? Kata is this very one-way thing in Gurdwara. It shouldn't be like that. It should be a question answer, back and forth, and debates and discussions, and sitting on the same level. The Gani shouldn't be just sitting there with his eyes closed, half asleep, repeating some Adatan that he's learned himself from somebody else that he's bored of learning. And even the Bani itself, right? You're doing like Kirtan and stuff to like on a Bhaja with like some Desi Bollywood tunes. But where's the rich rag traditions where you can actually see with your eyes that even though you yourself might not know how to play the instrument, but you can see the mastery of that. There's not a permeation of mastery and such high level quality and stuff in Angurukas anymore. And it's because there's so many of them is one of the reasons. And the reason he just got the rest of the band who are sort of in it, not taking it to the extreme and saying, okay, how can I be the best at this? And that's basically it.
Yeah,
Oh, actually, one more point actually with this, I wrote it down about the education thing. So yeah, that's really rated that these guys are going to Punjab and putting their money where their mouth is and actually setting these schools and providing education. But with education, the results are only ever seen in the long term. You don't see those results immediately. So even though the efforts are going on now, you won't see those results for maybe like 20, 30 years. And that's a very long payout. So again, we got to be patient with this because as a society that's so geared towards instant gratification, we want to see results in the short term, and you won't really see that and stuff, especially with large bandic changes. Hence why even like Azadism, I say this as well. This should have been done by somebody like ages ago, far greater than I was. We should have had like this concept and these sort of philosophies, Azadism or something equivalent, not decades ago, but perhaps even a century ago, just before the partition and stuff. And at this point, we should be implementing these things, and like the phase 2 and 3 and 4 and stuff, I've got sort of planned out. They should have been already well on their way, but we're just behind on these things. So we've got to have a bit of patience now that all these things are sort of starting up now, and there is a big change in terms of interest in the Bantic stuff as well, which we have to recognise. But we might not see the results of that for maybe a couple of decades still.
And you definitely, I think specifically Singhs who started there, they definitely know that this is a long-term plan. We will not be seeing
Yeah.
changes for because it's like like a education is like you graduate when you're like 18, so definitely it's like a 20 years goal where you
Yeah.
might see something comes out of it like but the question for specifically Paisa for you because like we're really interested in this that how do you think there should be another class or like somewhere we can like as you said more feeding their self-interest because not everyone is Brahmgyani who just want to do everything for the panthers. Everyone is trying to get education because they want to move out to a different country because they want to get some money. That's why we look for the jobs, right? How
Yeah.
can we feed their self like for the kids, right? Like so that they can become more panthik. Like should we have like a separate class for them that is panth related or like how can we make them more pantic rather than just it's good like giving them Gurbani Santhya, but also
Mm.
having them have that mindset where they can see that there's a benefit in this.
Yeah, if you want to make the band more bandic, you've got to make the band more, in terms of on an individual level, more khalsa, right? So value attracts value. When you have somebody who's got a high value, be that sangat was finding each other. So we've been less concerned of like how do you make someone bandic and necessarily. We've got Maharaj has already told us what we need to do, and that's build your bhakti, and build a level of understanding of how the world works. That's why we have both the Miri and Piri right side of Sikhi, and then if you already are now in Sikhi, get your Nitinem sorted, right? So Nitinem itself is brilliant in terms of the psychology. Um, you might sit and think like, well, what's the point of reading these Panj Bani every morning? It takes an hour. I'm not really paying attention the entire time, and whatever, right? But really, what Nitinem does, from my perspective, is actually build a sense of discipline in your mind, and that's a transferable skill. If you're able to commit to something for that long in the morning as well, it's brilliant, every day of your life. Sure, you might have some days where it's just unfeasible, whatever, something comes up. But if you're making this commitment every day, that shows to your brain that I can do something that I feel that I'm comfortable to begin with, right? That skill then is transferable into other things. So Nitinem gives you discipline. Nitinem gives you an appetite for commitment. Now, that should be obvious why that is a useful trait to have in any human being, because then that can transfer over to your work life, to your careers, to any of the sort of projects and stuff that you're working on. And it's one of the things I always recommend to everybody, even if you're not like Amritari and stuff, is just to build a Nitinem. If it's not the Panchbaniya, then at least do like Mool Mantra or build some sort of like daily ritual. People have this idea that rituals are banned in Sikhi. Now that's not really true. What Sikhi talks against is, and Bani talks against, is blind ritualism, doing things blindly. But if you do things with pyar and prem and an understanding and consciousness of what is going on whilst you're doing it, that is very different. But even then, if you're getting bored of Nitin and whatever, the idea that you're committing to something itself, and that the best time, one of the best times to do your Nitin is when you don't want to do it, because that shows your brain that no matter how much barriers you're putting onto me, how much resistance you're giving me, I'm still going to do it regardless. That shows a level of himmat that's very easy to test yourself with. So you can have, and then if you're getting your brain used to resistance and pushing past resistance, then when you face resistance in other aspects of your life, then you will also then the brain will just be like, so have the muscle memory in terms of, okay, that I recognize this attitude of resistance and I'm going to do it anyway. So if you build a population of Sikhs that have this sort of mindset that Maharaj themselves have taught us how to forge, then up you'll get Bantik, right? We need to be less concerned about how many people end up being Bantik. We just got to be concerned on ourselves and maybe those close around us. And the best way, Kavi Santokh Singh has like 3 ways he mentions in Suraj Prakash that how to convince somebody. And the first way he mentions is through physical violence, right? Through force. You force somebody to do something, that's how you convince them, right? That's the worst way of doing it. The second way is through speech. You can like lecture them and you can tell them and whatever, right? Which is better. You're not using force and violence, but sometimes that's not as good as the last way, which is you be the example. You want to be in a certain state where somebody goes, okay, wow, the way that guy is living, I want to live that way because it's obviously working for him. I want it to work for me as well. So you ask, who is your guru, right? That's the way. That's the real way you want to convince people, is to be it yourself. And again, this is why we're having a big increase in the Bantik, people being Bantik, is because people are actually taking their Sikhi seriously, even though maybe on social media and stuff it doesn't seem that way. The fact that obviously you guys are coming here and listening to this and joining this Discord or whatever, that itself is the evidence for it.
I never heard anyone putting Nitinem in that perspective, and that's a really amazing perspective
Yeah, you
that
like
I
that, yeah.
heard. That was that, like, like that Sponge Barnia builds a sense of discipline, and and it is a transferable skill, and that's amazing way of looking at it. And I
Yeah.
think lots of youth here will definitely benefit from it. Like, we look at our like daily rituals that we have, waking up at Amritullah, right?
Mm.
Because it all ties back to psychology and how Jordan Peterson and other these psychologists are putting it. Have a routine, do that, right? What Guru Sahib has already done it. Just that when we hear it from a different person or hear from someone who can explain in a better perspective, and
Yeah.
then we get a sense of it. Okay, you know what? This is really good. I think now it makes so much sense to me.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that is very strong in other communities. You can see as well, like Islam, right? You can disagree. I'll heavily disagree with a lot of things a lot of the philosophies of Islam, right? But I cannot deny the Muslims' discipline. Like if you look at the way they go Friday mosque, everything, they do their own Sunday classes, pray 5 times a day and stuff like that. The Muslim who commits to that, I can't fault him for that. That's very, very attractive part of Islam, despite all the things I heavily disagree with about Islam. But that is very that's part of their thing that they've got proper down. And again, it's something we can learn as Sikhs as well. Like if they can do it and they're just living normal lives as well, and it's literally like a couple of hours of your day. You got 24 of these hours. Some of them you spend sleeping, some of them you spend working. How many do you spend like working on your own discipline? And if you clock that bit, then the rest of your life gets far easier.
Definitely. Ji, and the next question was What do you know about the New World Order, aka One World Government?
All right. Okay. I'm aware of it, right? And when I first got into Sikhi, actually, I was used to be Mullah before, and then I took Amrit and stuff like when I was at university. I kept my case around then as well. When I first got into Sikhi, I never used to be into it. Like, it was more of like a cultural family thing. Like, yeah, whatever, right? But when I got into it was like end of like secondary school or high school, right? Then I sort of like stumbled across a lot of these conspiracy theories. I used to like binge watch a lot of these like 9/11 documentaries and like all these kind of things. What those things teach you is a very valuable skill. And that is to think critically. Is to actually start looking at the way the standard information you're being fed, and actually understand, okay, what are the alternatives to this? Now, those alternatives may not always be correct, or even logical, but it's the fact that you're building a mindset in which you're not just going to blindly take what you're being fed. That is a value. That is a good value you can extract from having a conspiratorial mindset in that sense. But the issue is with conspiracy thinking is that a lot of it can tend to be less about the issue itself, but more about your own personal desire to be anti-contrarian, and that's very seductive because to be anti-establishment, anti the norm, is something that everybody wants to do. The reason why a kid rebels from their parent is because they want their own sense of independence, right? And it's a good trait to have. Um, Again, with most things in life, you have to have a good balance. So with the New World Order, I know I've been a bit more like meta about how I'm answering this, but with the New World Order in particular, yeah, it's probably undeniable that there are elements of the world right now that have a level of influence in governments, especially that affect policy. Are they as widespread and as pervasive in society and controlling as we attribute to them? I'm not too sure. And the reason why I'm saying not too sure is because in economics you learn about this thing called well, if you learn about economics, how I'm teaching it is part of the Austrian School of Economics. They call it the economic calculation problem. And it's basically talking about how it's impossible to centrally plan a society, especially at a certain size. And there's quite a few reasons why that is, and it goes into like the whole subjective theory of value and the different consumer preferences and stuff like that. And I do recommend to read this article. Where is it? The Battle of Isms, and it goes through this economic calculation problem as well. So if they're that controlling of every aspect of the economy and of the government and stuff, it's actually impossible for that to happen because of the sheer amount of variables and stuff in play. No single individual or group of individuals can manage the complexity of society in which there are trillions upon trillions of transactions happening every day. That is almost bonkers. But is there a sense of like there's people are attempting to centrally plan the world? Yeah, that is true. You have things like the World Bank, you got things like the United Nations and stuff like that. And whether they are effective or not is probably a different conversation. But I don't know. A lot of the issue with a lot of this literature around this stuff is that it's the methodology tends to be faulty as well. So you attract a lot of people who are trying to be anti-contrarian again. Then people are trying to be scientific about it. But then the other issue is that there's a stigma around these topics in which there's already a preconceived bias by people who are researching into it. So it's very difficult to determine what is true here. Yeah, I am aware of it. So yeah, to answer the question simply, and the whole idea of one world government, it would never work if they did implement it. It's just simply economically, it's impossible because of the economic calculation problem. It's the same reason why the Soviet Union collapsed, China collapsed and stuff, because they're similarly trying to be very centralized government. You can't centralize power to that degree, especially not for long. And that's basically the history of humanity. Actually, there's a lot of central planning since day one of civilization, and every single one's collapsed. So even if they did somehow manage to set it up, it wouldn't last very long. Yeah, hopefully that answers that. Yeah, I think that's all I want to say about that.
The next question was, What have the gurus written upon the political arena? Which text should be explored more?
Yeah. So what have the gurus written about this stuff? A lot. So you obviously have Guru Granth Sahib Ji Maharaj, right? And the main purpose of that Granth is to give you mukti, right? And it chooses the method of bhakti in which to achieve that. The easiest method, the most inclusive method, and probably the most fun method, right? So that's basically what Bani is, right? So that is Gyan for all Sikh, and anybody can be a Sikh, and anybody can receive Gyan from the Guru. What is then unique then is that if you choose to practice Sikhi and practice your spirituality through politics, which for a Sikh, right, this is an important point, that all politics is for a Sikh is an avenue in which to express their spirituality. If you're not expressing your spirituality through politics, politics is absolutely useless and you should stay away from it. Um, and then you can see this when people compromise their Sikh principles to pursue political ideals. Um, and that's very dangerous. And it's the same thing that happened in other religions, in which people put the philosophy of their religions to one side and the principles of it in order to, in the short, to to themselves, they try and convince us it's in the short run. We'll go back to it afterwards. Is that the end? Was it the whole like the ends justify the means kind of ideology? That is very dangerous, right? But but yeah. So for the Khalsa and stuff, that's the Khalsa expression of Sikhi, and then Maharaj has created many Granths in which we can learn from. Dasam Granth being the foremost of that. But you've also had like in Maharaj's darbars, of which many of this stuff was lost, is that they'd bring all the like the top political scientists. We will call them political scientists from today's perspective. They were of course something else then. From around India and around like Persia and around the world kind of thing, the top thinkers into the Anantapura Darbar, and they'd be coming in and they'd be debating and translating texts like Jankya Niti, which is like an ancient Indian text on statecraft, and even like there'd be Persian texts and stuff on these topics, and Hiptu Shah as well. Every like king would read Hiptu Shah, and Maharaj themselves would read it, and they've got it translated in the Anandpur Darbar. And there's a lot of these grants and stuff that were translated. A lot of it has been lost. But one major writing which is Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Bani is Charitra Pakyan, and that is a series of 405 mini stories, or some of them are quite long actually. But the 405 stories of like deceitful things happening, like women and stuff like cheating on their husbands and husbands cheating on their wives, and also like their wives sort of like fighting battles and stuff like that. So there's all sorts of stuff in there, right? And these form a platform, and they're stories that are not just made up by Maharaj, but they're also extracted from like traditional Punjabi folklore. You've got Hindu like Mahabharatas in there. You've got stuff from like all the Persians tales and stuff are put in there as well. It's basically build like a massive set of stories to teach the Khalsa how to think strategically and what the world is really like. So Guru Granth Sahib Ji makes it very nittimal, which is what Maharaj themselves found out when nobody stepped forward to when Guru Tegh Bahadur got Shaheed, and then when the Mughal said, "Okay, step forward if you're a Sikh of the Guru," or whatever, everyone got scared, kind of thing, right? And the Maharaj saw that because this whole like Santaka Marg that had been set up by the preceding gurus have made the band very niddamal, which is fine. You'll still get mukti that way, but now there's a time and a need in this game that we are playing in Maya to fight against tyranny in order to protect the Sant on that Marg, right? The Sikh band and others. And therefore, Mara is giving Dasambani, just like any responsible parent would give their child, education on how the world is really like in order to prepare them. And Jutta Pekan is a very good example of that. And I think I mentioned it earlier. I'll probably do some posts on it as well, some different Jittas and what lessons we can learn from it. So yeah, Jutta Pekan, and people don't really know, but the job base I'll be reading at Nitinem Bani comes right at the end of Jutta Pekan. So you've got all these 405 stories of like all these like Kartuta and stuff are happening. And right at the end, Maharaj is Jope Sahib in order to protect us against those things. So people don't realize what is Jope Sahib asking for protection from. It's from all those 405 stories to give us strength and the buddhi and the vivek to recognize when we're being duped and recognize all these different tactics and sly techniques people are using against us, and how we can employ some of these things ourselves in order to pursue Khalsa ethics and Khalsa princely states. So again, not very relevant to the republics and democracies and modern bureaucracies and stuff we live in today. But still, a lot of the world leaders still read it. Why? Because the mindset in which the author approaches those topics with is very strategic and very useful. Same with Ben Samadek. There's an element of practicality there in the way they're approaching problems that we can learn. And it's very inspiring, actually, and it helped inspire this manifesto as well. So even though I disagree with many parts of it, I understand where it's coming from and understand the genius behind it too. And it echoes the traditions of the Anandapur Darbar. And what other texts should be explored more is that I'm biased, but there's this manifesto. I really recommend to read that too.
Gee, for sure, Bhai Sawad. I've gone through it. It's pretty deep, and I think we had to do it. I had to go through a couple of times to like get it.
Is it? Yeah, yeah.
Uh,
Good,
the
good.
first time you just can't get it because specifically if you're not from an economic background or like you don't have a clue what's going on.
Yeah, yeah.
ठीक है जी, I think that's a really good answer. And the next question is also, I think, very important to many of us here. And it's basically trying to find the difference, like what is the difference between Azadism,
Yeah.
Maharaja Ranjit Singh's Raj, and Misl period?
Okay, brilliant. Good, really good question. So, in the manifesto towards the end, I actually addressed this in a bit of detail, not too much, but I'm actually in disagreement with Maharaja Ranjit Singh that he should not have centralized the missiles into a Sikh Raj. I think that was a mistake. Why do I say that? It's because the missiles are very successful in terms of what they achieved. They kicked out the Afghans and the Mughals, and they set up a system in the Punjab region of providing very, very crucial functions of what a state does, and that's security. And they meddled very little in the economy as a result. Now, when Maharaja Ranjit Singh came in, the pretense is that all these Muslims and stuff are fighting each other, and Maharaja Ranjit Singh came in and unified them all. That is, I don't think that is that accurate. Yeah, there's probably some truth to that, and the missiles sometimes did fight with each other, but it's been overplayed how much it is. Satnam Singh of Denmark, I think it's Satnam Singh SDK on Instagram. He's writing a book actually on this topic, and really lucky he let me read one of the chapters of it, and it's on this topic. And he actually debunks a lot of the common misconceptions around the Misl period, that they weren't just warlords, just sort of like random. They were quite a sophisticated system. And there was actually debates going on that Maharaj themselves, right, Guru Gobind Singh, you said that the Gurgadi now goes to the Khasa Panth as a collective. So there's a debate between the Sikh intelligentsia of how would that look. Would it be like, is this having a Sikh Raj in terms of kingdoms, the similar way the Mughals and stuff did it? Or is it a bit more like on an individual level, maybe towards what Azadism is trying to achieve? Obviously, they would never say the word Azadism didn't exist back then, but that sort of like underlying philosophy and the sort of compromise they came up with was the Misl system. Now, it wasn't perfect. I also critiqued some parts of it in the manifesto, and I offer how we can improve it in order to implement it again, because I'm very heavily pro Misl system if we do it in a very particular way. And again, the manifesto goes into what those adjustments I would make to it in order to prevent some of the harmful outcomes. But so how does Azadism sit amongst Mara and Jesus Singh and the Misl system? So Azadism promotes the Misl system, but it makes a few adjustments. Instead of being tax-based and land-based, it does it client-based and Dasvanda-based. What does that mean? Same way you might have a household of a family, right? And each member of that family might have a different subscription service to different phone providers, for example, right? So covering that one household will be 3 or 4 different phone companies, right? The same way the missiles could operate. So as an individual, you can take a subscription for security services to a particular missile. Now that missile covers your household in terms of providing its security, upholding the non-aggression principle I mentioned right at the start, and preserving your property rights. Now, if your house has a couple of members, you guys might have like a family package, for example, or you can have multiple missiles covering the same household. So what we would see is actually instead of having one missile for a particular area that we had in the last time we tried this method, we'd have many, many, many missiles covering the same area. The same way you have many supermarkets covering the same town, or the many different, I don't know, like Netflix subscriptions and all different sort of services covering the same locality. It's not based on region anymore. The Azadist conception of the Misl system is based on the client. on the person, and in return the person pays them the Swan. And if they don't like the Misl and the Misl's not serving their interests anymore, they withdraw with the Swan and they'll pay another Misl, right? Or if they don't like any of them, they'll set their own one up. It's just like businesses in a free market would ideally work as well. And that way you avoid this problem of like having one monopoly on force, which is what you have today in modern societies. Like the whole like I don't really like the whole ACAB defund the police movement. I think it's very misinformed, but it's undeniable that the police forces are no longer serving the interests of a vast, a large proportion of the population. But the population does not have a choice. Hence why the police are going to be funded regardless of their choice. They're always going to be funded by taxpayers' money. But if they're now paid based on performance, then they have to start taking into account the customer and their clients' interests, which is what you're seeing in places like South Africa. So the South African community got so fed up of how ineffective and incompetent the South African government's police forces were. All these PMCs came in, and private military and private security companies came in, and they're providing a lot of security for different neighborhoods. And the people that willingly pay it because they provide far better security than the government can provide, right? And it's a competition amongst them. So if they don't produce a level of security better than their competitors will, then the people will pay the competitor, not them. So there's a whole like natural selection at play. That's how I envision the Misl system working again as well. And they're constantly competing for clients amongst each other. And that's how it worked. But in terms of the Maharaja Ranjit Singh Raj, the reason why Maharaja Ranjit Singh Raj worked so well is the same reason why it collapsed, because it all relied on the competency and the benevolence of the ruler. Thank God, Maharaja Ranjit Singh was largely a decent guy, so he understood the importance of being secular and helping other communities, investing in certain projects and that sort of things, right? So we didn't really experience any tyranny, and hence, therefore, our perception of the Sikh Raj is very romanticized in terms of, oh, that was a Sikh Raj, we had really good education rates and all that kind of stuff. But we really had that because it relied on Maharaja Ranjit Singh. But there was no guarantee that his son or his son's son or the generations down the line would continue that legacy. And history, I've mentioned the manifesto, is littered with the examples of the progeny of kings falling into tyranny or just not living up to the level of the founder, right, the first king, which is what you saw in the Persian Empire, right? You had like what's his name, Cyrus the Great, so revered, even the Jews called him a messiah, the only non-Jew to be given that status. Yet the Persian Empire, the accumulated Persian Empire set up, because it's so successful, the kings, like his sons and sons and sons, like Xerxes, etc., grew up in such luxury. So you might have heard that saying, like, oh yeah, good times create weak people create bad times, that saying, right? I can't remember all right now, but that what happened there was that the kings had no longer an understanding of hardship or understanding of the people. They just grew up in a life of luxury, and they just lost touch. And then and how that created weak times, right? The empire became weak bureaucratically, and then when the Scythians and stuff came in, or the barbarians, and the Greeks as well, they ultimately, Secundar, what's his name, Alexander the Great came in, just steamrolled them all, because the institution became rotten from the inside. The same thing would have happened with the Sikh Raj after a certain point. Yeah, we started off strong. There was no guarantee we would carry on that way. What we're doing then is, by centralizing all the power into one group or one family or one sort of like central planners, is you're putting all your eggs in one basket. And when you do that, that's inherently risky. And this is what Azadism is trying to be the opposite of. Don't put your eggs in one basket. Allow the risk of tyranny to be diversified. And that's what a Misl system does. That's why I like the Misl system a lot. And I think we should try it again with Azadism's adjustments.
That's a good analysis of looking at things. Specifically, like I think I agree on that. Definitely the part where, like, like having, if it's centralized, then definitely there's lots of danger around it, because it's just one person, and that's exactly what happened with Maharaja Ranjit Singh.
Yeah.
The next question is, can we build a state within another state? Sikhs can govern themselves with their own private system while living in like the land of England. How do we build up to this level?
Yeah, brilliant. Actually, I'd really recommend reading this article I've got on the screen at the moment, the Battle of the Ism ones, because it sort of touches on this. What even is a state, right? So when I say the word state, I use it interchangeably with the word government. And even government, I'm using it to refer to the involuntary systems that we are subjected to in today's age. However, if we look at it from a pure definition standpoint, both those things can exist in a free society, right? So the word anarchism, right? So anarchism is a philosophy where you don't have a single government running the society, but that does not mean there's no governance. It means that the associations between people are held on a voluntary basis. And at any time, if you do not like a particular organization, you can leave, right? And for those organizations to attract members, they have to provide an incentive. Maybe they pay them, or maybe they give them a certain role, right? Does that sound familiar? It's because it's a business. A business are states within states. You have a same way you have like a monarchy essentially. You got the king at the top, the CEO. You got all the ministers, all the managers, and then you got all the employees being the subjects, right? These are little mini states within the state. We don't see them in that way because of the terminology and stuff. This is what I was saying right at the start as well. We've got to understand what the words mean from the root in order to solve problems. So when you have what we Sikhs can then do is actually set up our own corporate governance systems. We can set up our own businesses, which are states within states. But what you guys are probably asking the question in terms of is that can we have a state in terms of like a border with lands and like a way of living there? Very difficult to do in modern day age, but not impossible. And one example of this is Osho. So I'm not sure if you guys seen that Netflix series of what's it called, Wild Wild West, I think, where there's this guy, there's this like Baba from India comes over, like it's fairly spiritual. He did like a whole like commentary on Japji Sahib as well, which is pretty good. But the thing ended up being like this weird sex cult. And they basically set up this city called Rajneeshpuram, I believe. I think that was the name.
Probably, yeah. Yep.
Yeah, you recognize it. Yes, and they had their own police force. They had their own schools. There's a whole little city there, right, within America. Um, Obviously, that failed because the actual management of it was crooked, and the actual central state actively worked against it. So it's very difficult to do nowadays, but it's not impossible. You got to just come together, buy the land, and then see and work with the regulators of the host country. What we're also seeing now is this the rise of special economic zones and smart cities. So Saudi Arabia is investing in these heavily. South America, yeah, and there's nothing to say that we cannot be doing that. And it's something I'd like to do later on in the later phases of Azadism to explore further. And I probably said too much by saying that, but yeah, these kind of things we should be invested in. It's funny you should actually mention this question because the next post I'm going to post on the Instagram is on Sikhs and city states, which is basically talking about the legacy that the Guru made. That they themselves would set up townships and cities like Ramdaspur, like Amritsar, like Hargobindpur and Anantapur. They just bought land and they set up their own little systems up there, like their own towns and stuff. We don't really do that anymore as Sikhs. I don't know why I do know why we don't, because the capital cost is so high nowadays and the regulations make it difficult. But yeah, that's a very good ambition to have as Sikhs to do that. And it's a good alternative intermediary to have a Khalistan where instead of banging our heads against a system that we know is not going to just give us any land like that by begging it and protest or whatever, let's actually go around and provide something of value, set up special economic zones around the world. And that's what we should be able to do. But yeah, hopefully we'll pull that a bit further later on.
Yeah, definitely. I think that is definitely a good idea. I think, and I think it also will give its like on a smaller scale, right? It's achievable, because it will not require that much effort. And also, it will be a good model to see how things goes, and we can do some experiments there as well, right? On how like economy gonna run and how I think that's what Guru Sahib did. Even like as you mentioned those cities and Kadur Sahib and other stuff.
Yeah.
We started with Kartarpur, right? That
Yeah.
Guru Sahib established it, and then had things going how they wanted to run, right?
Yeah.
And in the cities they had the power. So I think rather than going from Khalistan, we should like strive, but first like to get an idea, like have a land where people, the community is there, and they're doing their whole stuff their own way.
Yeah, I mean, we constantly hear like one of the common criticisms for Khalistan is like you can't run a godless, how you can run a country, right? And to be fair, it's a very valid criticism, and it's one that I used to say as well. Like these Godware are our opportunity to experiment with statecraft before we go to that level. And you got to remember, right? Yeah, it's not you got to have a business plan. So I say this to people as well, especially Newcastle. I say it too, that you're trying to start a state, right? But you haven't got a plan. Like, you don't start a business without a business plan. So why would you start a state without a plan? It's not shareholders' wealth at stake here. It's people's lives at stake, right? It's millions of people's lives at stake. And what we should be doing as Sikhs is actually being very entrepreneurial. The reason why Israel worked as it did is because the Jewish community was very entrepreneurial, even at that stage. It's one of the reasons why Hitler killed them, because the Jewish were outperforming many of the other communities in Germany because they were so entrepreneurial. They were owning the businesses, etc., right? And that's the whole like this greedy Jews, these racist sort of remarks sort of rose because of their entrepreneurial nature. And then when you got like people like Netanyahu, who for all his faults, the guy's probably like actually probably quite evil. But he is one of the few leaders on this planet that actually understand economics. If you actually listen to an interview with him with Ben Shapiro, I don't really like Ben Shapiro that much. He's a conservative trying to be a libertarian, but there's a good interview that they both did with each other. I really recommend everyone to listen to it because it shows actually Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, actually has an understanding of how economics works and how he implemented reforms that helped propel Israel to be one of the most successful economies of today. It turned deserts into arable land. That's a very hard thing to do, and they did achieve it. Like, you got a whole very advanced economy in the Middle East. But yeah, businesses are our opportunity in the West, especially now, to experiment with statecraft. You have your own treat your corporate governance policy as the constitution of your mini state within a state. That's what a business is. We've really got to get away from this concept of okay, money and business and profit is bad, but statecraft and like taxes and all this kind of stuff is good. You got to really understand like what these things are fundamentally in the level. I'm going to recommend this article a lot for this concept, especially because it breaks down exactly what an organization is and how it differs from a state, and we realize actually the state and an organization are very similar concepts.
The next question is, how can we slow down or stop outsiders from using us as PR? So they're specifically talking about outsiders as in non-Sikhs.
Using us as PR. I think that serves us more than it serves them a lot of the time. So I wouldn't, unless you give me a more specific example, I don't really see that as much of an issue that much, especially in terms of Lunga. So there's actually one article I did. Where is it? This one here. So the Sikh Socialists is like a group, and they wrote this thing where the whole like Lunga and stuff is treated as a PR stunt rather than like ways to actually go on and actually solve world hunger and stuff like that. But obviously, I was arguing back because they really misunderstood economics and they bring it in unnecessarily. So I was countering it. This is a counter article essentially to that, debunking the claims. But nothing's stopping Lunga from going to solve world hunger. But the strategic benefit of having Sikhs being associated with free food serves us a lot. And it's very underrated how much that serves us, because a lot of the time, especially in the UK, you go to like random Gurdwara and stuff, right? And you say, "Oh, do not bet about Sikhism." Well, the top things they'll say that Sikhs do is free food. Mentally, that's extremely advantageous for us, and we need to learn to figure out ways how we can leverage that reputation rather than tarnish it. Hence, why I put so much effort into this article, pushing it back against that. That kind of PR thing is something that, yeah, outsiders are using it, but we should be using it ourselves as well. It's only going to be a service, but hopefully that answers that bit. I recommend this article if not.
The next question is, what is happening is that some information within Sikhi begin either is being withheld or hidden to suit us individuals' agenda. How can we change this to educate our youth correctly upon Sikhi?
Some information within Sikhi is being either withheld or hidden to suit an individual's agenda. Alright, okay, so with this, right, everybody on this planet has an agenda. That is undeniable. Everyone has a bias. We have to be more concerned with what exactly is the agenda, which is not always very clear, admittedly, which is fine, right? That is part of the task. How can we then change this to educate our youth correctly upon Sikhi? Again, I think we touched on this a bit earlier. The best way if you're seeing an issue in terms of how Sikhi is being practiced or not being practiced, the best way in terms of remedying that is to be the example yourself, and be present in your sangat and showing how that example is beneficial in your life. Because what have we really got to hide in Sikhi, right? There's nothing really here that's not beneficial to someone. If you really believe as a Sikh, you believe in Sikhi, you genuinely believe it improves your life. And I know that for a fact for my own life, right? So we should not have any insecurity about that. So as a result, live life as a Sikh as the best possible way you can. No flower blossoms just on the inside, right? Blossom on the outside as well. Choose a path in Sikhi. Khalsa is one path, prominent path that I chose, path that most people chose, and it's a very visual path, right? And you can show other Sikhs that by following this path, it's helped me achieve this amount of wealth, helped me achieve this amount of success here politically, helped me achieve this amount of success here in charity, etc., right? And that inspires others to follow that path with you. In terms of agenda, you are right that there are perverse agendas within our community, of which some I try to expose. In this article, there's an agenda. Socialist Sikhs, right? They have a socialist agenda here, right? I don't have a problem with people being socialist. I generally don't. And especially with socialist Sikhs, I don't really have anything against them. It's just that if they're willing or not, right? But there are certain groups who I've called the Neo-Khalistani who have very perverse agendas. And they claim to be themselves representatives of the Band, but yet at the same time, if you bring them ideas that challenge their worldview, they respond with threats to violence. And they have committed to those violent acts as well. I myself have got threats to violence from some of these groups, right? Yet they have massive followings, and everyone just like blindly follows them and likes them whatever they does, and oh yeah, these are Bantic, right? But on one hand, they're doing that, and on the other hand, then they're threatening things and making false allegations, and there's a lot of evidence for this kind of stuff. So it's really like understanding what the agendas are at play, and then competing, right? We are in a marketplace of ideas, and if you want your idea to win, you've got to prove to others why your product is the best, the same way a business does. If you believe the way you understand Sikhi is beneficial and able to uplift the lives of people and fulfill your understanding of Sikhi, then live it. That's the best way to do it.
Hanji. The next question, addition to the question number 11, which was about the New World Order. This is
Oh yeah.
about the World Economic Forum, and of course, the founder of it. What do you think about this?
I don't think too much about it. Or I just see the World Economic Forum, the World Bank, and these sort of organizations as just attempts at central planning. I don't like certain policies. I believe it's Klaus Schwab. If I'm thinking the same guy, the guy looks like a demon. But they're trying to set up this thing called central bank digital currencies. That's extremely dangerous if they set that up, because what that means is that the government then can centrally control what you spend your money on, and they can track your spending. Now you might think, oh, I've got nothing to hide, I'll just spend whatever. But they can start saying, okay, well, okay, you actually drove this much yesterday to go to some event, but that's not environmentally sustainable, so we're going to ban you from driving the next day, or make you drive a little bit less, so you can't buy you can't buy petrol above a certain limit. So the government's now centrally planning the economy. Now, if you understood the economic calculation problem, you'd understand why that's so dangerous. Because if the government's planning the economy, there's no market prices. No market prices means that there's no sustainable way of understanding what resets of resource allocation are effective and efficient. Now, the worst case scenario of that is that what happened in the Soviet Union is when they started centrally planning the prices and the economy, is that people ended up starving to death because the government's malpractice. So we have to rely on the government's benevolence and competency in order to make these decisions on our behalf. Now, anybody who has even a slight understanding of history would realize that trusting a government to centrally plan your decisions is farcical, right? They do not have your best interests at heart. So let's not let them have these powers. We need to do everything in our power to ensure that the government has little power and ultimately no power. The way you're going to have a free society is by having a not free, like a Ghulam government. right? Because we have to understand that government is meant to be the servant of the people, not the other way around. And so much throughout history, it has been the other way around, where the people have been the servants of the government. That isn't the way that society should be structured, and we're suffering because of it. And I see organizations like the World Economic Forum and the World Bank and these kind of things as efforts in which to maintain that status quo of consolidating government power and expanding its influence. Now, in terms of specifics and how that kind of stuff works, I don't look into too much. Maybe something I'll look into more. If you want to send me anything of these that I should be reading, yeah, shoot them through. We should be raising awareness of these kind of things as well.
Paisa, I just wanted to make sure they're not taking too much of our time because there's still a few questions.
Oh yeah, Tiga. Let's go to
Are similar to Kalifullah Singh Ji. We all have heard about their sakhis on him and how he conducted his duties at Akal Takht Jathedar. And of course, not talking about chopping heads off, but on the drive that he had to lead the Panth.
yeah, yeah. It just reminded me of Saki actually. Like the British came to the border, right? And Kalifullah Singh saw it, and he lined them all up and chopped all their heads off. And obviously, that's a bit like not palatable to like the modern Sikh, right? And there's one guy who he didn't want he cut his gear so right he sent it to him and then he came for his eyes or something, right? So yeah, I mean there are things that are like Akali Fulla Singh today, right? A lot of them exist in Dalpan. Do I think we'll ever have a Jathedar similar to that? I don't think we should strive for a Jathedar being that. The position of a Jathedar, right, is only ever a caretaker. So we have this big conception of what the Akal Takht Jathedar is. The Akal Takht Jathedar isn't a position of that large relevance. What the position of relevance is the Jathedar of the Khalsa, of the Khalsa Panth, and that's historically been Buddha Dal. Henceforth, why the Jathedar of Buddha Dal would be the Jathedar of Akal Takht at the same time. So I wouldn't put too much stress on trying to figure out who's going to be the best Jathedar to sit in the Akal Takht, because the Akal Takht is just a parliamentary building. It's the meeting place for that Sarbat Khalsa I mentioned earlier that should be happening, where the Khalsa comes together. All that the Jathedar the Akal Takht should be doing is making sure the place is ready for those every 6 month biannual meetings or something. So what I'm trying to say now is with the Kalifullah Singh, every Singh can be a Kalifullah Singh. There's no sort of idea where like we have to kind of find somebody and instill them into that position. You got to be that position yourselves and rule your own mind in that self. Like the whole like idea of Khalsa Raj is like wherever you put your foot is Khalsa Raj, and you should be the Jathedar of your own mind first and foremost, and finding less of this idea of being finding someone else to rule on your behalf. That's what really means to be Khalsa.
Yep. The next question is what I mean. Oh, sorry. It's in Punjab. Do you think physical fighting would make a difference? Are we seen as too weak or pushovers in India?
Purifying made a difference. I don't think we're seen as too weak or pushovers. I just don't think a violent conflict at this point in time would be any way strategic. You will not win. That's just a fact of the matter. You will not win. You can have this idea of like, yeah, the castle never gets defeated and the castle will win. Sure, fine, whatever, right? But yeah, look at the practicality of this. It's not just your lives at stake here. You might be happy to give Shahidi, right, as the castle, but are you happy to make all your family be Shahid? And this is the sort of thing that's going on with like Amrit passing at the same time as, right? A lot of the Shihis were in the 80s as well, which undeniably hampered the growth of that movement to sustain itself. The enemy you're fighting is not honourable. It's not fighting soldiers against soldiers. It's fighting against you and then take your whole family with you. Innocent people die on both sides, right? And it gets very dirty very quickly. I don't think that's a situation we should get ourselves into again. And because it won't work, firstly. You won't get a Khalistan at the end of that. You'll end up having the whole region turning into an Afghanistan. And all these people like crying about Punjabis leaving Punjab right now. Well, why are they going to stay in a war zone? They're going to want to leave even more then, right? There's no business opportunities, no employment opportunities. There's going to be even worse drug epidemic. Everyone's being depressed. So a war zone situation right now, the armed struggle is very, very anti-progress at this point in time. There's other situations where it's more in line with okay, that's probably better strategy for that time. But for our time right now, this is not the way to do it. And I've got a post in which I outline this argument in far more detail on my Instagram called "Armed Resistance is Futile." I highly recommend you to read this because it outlines my argument clearly here. Yeah, so that's all I'll say for that one.
जी. The next question is, what do you mean by getting together as a community? How do we use our money as a community? Where should the money be directed? Who will be the figurehead of the community?
Yeah, okay. So this is I will not answer it because it's more phase two related stuff. So I'll leave that for then. In terms of figurehead, again, the same thing I said about leaders. Start finding leaders and be your own leader. We don't need any figureheads. You need to produce. We need results. We don't need leaders. We've got loads of leaders. We've already got the supreme leader, Guru Gobind Singh Ji Maharaj, right? Guru Khalsa Panth is our leader. So we don't need to find any more figureheads. We've got plenty of them. We need to have results now. In terms of where they should be directed, again, everybody has ideas of where if they were given £1 million, how would they use it to solve their band, right? You'll get like a bunch of different opinions. What we need to facilitate is a situation in which we can start making that a reality and devoting funds towards it. But yeah, I won't answer that more than that. That's more phase two related stuff.
Do you feel all the anti-Sikh agencies' presence in UK might label you as an extremist? The UK seems like an India 2.0 at this point.
I hope not, because I'd like to go back to India at some point, so I don't want to be labelled an extremist. But genuinely, a lot of what I say here is not extreme. I do not call for violence. Like unlike other actual neo-Khalistanis who lack all strategy and common sense, I do not call for violence. So that, by definition, does not make me an extremist. What I am, or at least I'm trying to be, is similar to how like Milton Friedman and Thomas Sowell and these economists were. They were heavily anti-state. In fact, Milton Friedman probably had more of an effect of reducing bureaucracy and power than a lot of these revolutionary movements do. Why? Because he worked within the system in order to completely revamp policy. Like the whole draft in the US, right, where everyone had to go join the military. Milton Friedman was one of the largest influential factors in getting rid of the draft. And stuff like that, like Estonia and stuff, they really completely reformed their economy in order to be one of the most prosperous economies in Europe at the time. So yeah, so this is sort of like avenue I'm trying to go towards. I'm not trying to be an extremist. I'm trying to be an economist. But yeah, I mean, UK seems like India 2.0. Yeah, I don't think it's that bad in the UK. The guys who are crying about it and whining about it, especially this Bloom thing, right? It's because the Bloom report that came out successfully called a lot of their BS out, and they didn't like it. And if you actually read the Bloom report, which I mentioned in the stories recently, a lot of people actually haven't read it. If you read it, it's become quite clear who exactly the Bloom report was talking about. And those guys have just now hid behind the rest of the Panth and saying, "Oh yeah, look what they're saying about the Sikh Panth." But really, the guy in the report was saying Khalistan itself isn't a subversive ideology. It's some of the proponents of it, the minority proponents of it, who are threatening other Sikhs and being anti or whatever rights. I do recommend reading the report. The guy's methodology was stupid, or whatever. That's fine, right? And who the hell is he to write about it in the first place? And he's probably most definitely a sellout, the Colin guy, right? But he did hit a lot of the points on the head, and there's anti-Sikh agency presence in the UK, sure, from foreign agencies. But there's also anti-Sikh presence amongst our own Banting institutions. I'm not too sure at this point in time, given some information I'm privy to, whose side some of these Bantic orgs are on. Especially these neo-Khalistanis, who I call out now and again. Because at the beginning, I thought they were just being stupid. But you can't be that stupid. So my position now is either you're working for the enemy, or you're so dumb you might as well be working for the enemy. I'm not too sure yet what it is. But I am sure of this. Every Sikh needs to be very vigilant on who they follow, including me, right? Be very critical of what I say. One of the good indicators here is that I'm open to debate on any of this and disagreement, right? I don't mind, I'll talk to any of you guys, right? But when you go to certain organizations and try to talk to them and they shut you down or they don't let you have certain opinions, then that should be red flags. That why are you, as a calling yourself a Bantic institution or Bantic organization, not being accountable to the Bant? That should be red flag, and it is a red flag for me. So that's how I see it. I don't think the UK is basically just serving its own interest, right? It's seeing trade deals with India, and it's realizing, well, if we pander towards the Sikh community, those trade deals and stuff that we're reliant on may be jeopardized, and the Sikh community are not providing any alternative deal. So why the hell would we serve the Sikh community's interests? It's just literally real politic again. I don't think it'll get that bad in terms of like censorship if you're not an idiot. If you are some of these new Khalistani groups, then yeah, you probably are going to feel it. I mean, you're asking for it. If you're going to keep openly announcing your intentions and not listening to people's genuine advice to you guys, be more strategic and think about what you're saying and doing, then what else do you expect? You're going to get yourselves raided, you're going to get yourselves censored and all this kind of stuff. You're not using your brains, you just keep fighting the problem head on. All right, that's my answer there.
Yeah. Yep. The next question is, what is your main end aim for Azadism? How big will this get?
Main end aim is Azadi. We'll get to Azadi, but I recommend reading this post, goals. It's on my Instagram again. It goes through the 7 goals of at least phase 1 of the Azadism project. So it's not the end goal, but it's the end goal of this phase 1. So it's what I'll go through quickly. Is just increase the economic literacy in the Band, provide foundations for long-term planning in terms of the mindset required to build effective governance systems solutions. Number 3, combat the rise of pro-central planning ideas within the Band through both direct ideological confrontation and offer compromise where possible, which I have done. Encourage increasing, consolidating, investing wealth within the Band for the benefit of all people everywhere. This goal is going to be more in towards the phase 2 stuff now, but a part of phase 1, I did start the Sikh business directory, which is still up. You can contribute to it, and you can view businesses and stuff on it. I just put it to a side for now in order to focus completely on phase 2. But yeah, that's an important part as well. 5, inspire future generations to draw from Azadism as they get more embedded and involved within the existing systems or establish new ones. So how I mentioned earlier, like Jagmeet Singh and these other politicians, I'd love for them to sit down with me and me just like trying to convince them of like instead of being a socialist or whatever, wanting to be an Azadist and promote this ideology, or maybe set up new political parties in the future in which, like how you get the Libertarian Party, maybe we should be a unique caucus within, like how the Mises caucus is in the US Libertarian Party. We could be an Azadist caucus within it. So yeah, this would be the foundations for that. And number 6, provide realistic and practicable plans on how to uplift the poor, destroy poverty, and maximize human freedom and prosperity, which is the ultimate aim of any political effort a Sikh should do. That is what you're trying to aim for in the long term. Help the poor, destroy poverty, and maximize freedom and prosperity, right? And 7, break echo chambers, hold Bantic organizations accountable and representatives accountable, spark debate, and move the discourse forward from vague notions of Azadi to detailed frameworks on what Azadi looks like and how to achieve it. That's basically the 7 sort of aims here.
And I think that's a very detailed answer, and then definitely people should go in more details by reading through that post of goals. The next question is, will you create courses about learning about economics? Sure.
Yeah, I can't give a financial advice, but I invest more in a long-term passive way because I ain't got time to sit here and stock pick. I don't have the supreme knowledge of institutional investors, and if you actually look at the literature, 98 or something like percent of people who actively invest end up doing worse off than if you just left it in an index fund. But yeah, we'll create a course learning about economics, politics. The course-wise, I'm not sure. I don't want to be a scholarly effort forever. I want to actually start implementing this stuff, so it's a very different way. I just recommend reading the manifesto and going through the posts and the articles on the website, and then also contributing yourself. That's the best way to learn. Because when you're writing, if you find a topic area you're passionate about and seeing how you can apply statecraft, etc., into it, that's how you learn. That's how I learned it. And then if you send it to me, I'll read it, and if it's appropriate, we'll even post it on the website. So let this be a community effort. How to manage your money. In terms of managing money and stuff, yeah, that's how I said it just now. I did have an article planned on like 9 different ways you should invest as a Sikh. Maybe I'll post it at some point. I'll see. It was part of my Bitcoin article. Like I was trying to like bash Bitcoin, but I never released it. We'll see. I'll see. I'll think about it, and we might release that still.
Yeah. So yeah, I think then the next question is: are you planning on partaking in any in-person debates or discussions with different organizations like NSFY, PC?
Oh, SCC, Educational Council, I think that is, and Socialist Sikhs. Yeah, NSYF. I think I've thoroughly burnt the bridges there. So he's one of the guys who's currently wants to smash my face in. So I don't know how that would work in person. But yeah, I mean, I was up for debating them in person. I mean, I chased him for a year, a whole year. I chased the guys. Like, okay, let's meet, let's meet, let's meet, let's have the discussion. Do it in private, do it in public, whatever you want. We just kept running away, and I got very frustrating. And obviously, I've written a oh, here he is. I've written a statement on. If you go onto my website, I've got it in my link here somewhere. But I've got a whole statement of what happened there. Um, where is it? If you write down azadism.co.uk and then you put slash like neo, that's NK I think it is. That's NK for Neo Khalistani. I've got a whole series here of like what happened and the whole like debunking the Neo Khalistani mindset. And one of them is a statement against NSYF and why they should, what they actually like in reality. But yeah, I would still debate the guy if he came out and apologized for his actions and showed some humility. Then yeah, I'd do it. I'd happily have a debate with him. I was seeking it from the beginning. We actually organised one to have a sit down and air out differences, and the coward never even turned up. That was the last straw for me. So I was like, well, screw it then. I don't want to interact with this guy anymore. So I mean, yeah, I mean, fair enough. Look, if they want to have these debates and stuff, then they've got to make themselves available for it. But it just goes to show that I don't think their intentions are pure. And then again, with the information I'm privy to, I really don't think interacting them at any sort of deep level at this point is probably actually strategic at all. In terms of Sikh Educational Council, I believe that's like Nojwani stuff. Yeah, them guys are quite good. I like them. We actually have something planned. I need to chase them up on it. Where it is more private though, where we're going to meet in person and go through the manifesto, like with like economists and stuff. And Socialist Sikhs. I know some guys who are part of that, and I actually quite like them. We disagree, obviously, but they seem they're open, and there was a talk of us doing an in-person debate. I think neither of us had time to sort it out, but maybe we'll see. A lot of the effort now is gearing towards just preparing for phase two at this point in time. A lot of this academic side of it is going to be put as secondary priority. I'll still like engage with it and stuff and putting content out, maybe at a less high rate and having debates, etc. Probably something I'm actually going to do next year. Actually, have some debates on the. So right at the end of the manifesto, I list a couple of questions that still need answering, and that I like the band's input on. And I might create a little think tank in which we do it privately, which I'll open up to everybody if they want to join. They have to go for like an interview and stuff, so we're on the same page, etc. But we'll just debate some of these questions here that I've listed. So that's what the debate really needs to be. But yeah, that's probably it with that. Yeah. But the
Right,
next
Sajid.
question will be the last one.
Okay, sounds good. Hanji, so I'm probably going to ask that as well, but someone
Yeah.
already asked it. So, how can we support you further? With whatever you're doing, an amazing job. I think lots of people have learned a lot today with this whole talk. So, we definitely would like to know, like, how can we support any efforts that you're putting forward or in future?
Yeah, that's really yeah, I really appreciate it. You guys are always supporting me right now by attending this and listening to me ask you all these questions. I appreciate that. Massive way to support is to actually just engage with the project. Um, you can support financially in terms of like giving donations, which I use to like fund different materials like print manifestos and like that kind of stuff. So I don't take any profit myself because I work. I don't need the money, so everything that I do raise just goes back into the project. But I don't encourage it at this point in time because I don't have any use for the money at the moment. So I don't really need any donations. But if you do want to support at a high level, it's just right for Azadism if you like to, and just like and share and follow these, follow the Azadism page and read the manifesto. That's a great way of supporting it. Yeah, and just in general, just engage with the project.
Sounds good. Paisa, just a few things you already did a reference to. If you can just share it, I think I'll probably send to you as well.
Yeah,
The podcast you talked about, like with the Jews, that person that you were saying,
yeah,
and I think the book you were talking about the misconceptions of missiles. I think someone wrote that book.
Oh, it's not
And
out yet.
about the
It's still in production.
it is. I thought it was already out. Okay.
No, not yet. I think he's trying to release it later this year, maybe December-ish time. But I think he's still writing it. Yeah.
ठीक है जी. And I think the other part you mentioned was South African government. I think that could be also something that
Mm,
really piqued interest and would like to know more about that. And like this is a good way that we can implement the police system and maybe make it better, right?
yeah,
Have that
yeah.
competition there.
That's it. That's it.
And also that interview you talked about with Ben Shapiro from Benjamin.
Oh yeah, Tiga. Yeah, send me this in like a text message or something, or on Instagram, and then I'll get the links for you and you can share them.
And sounds good. But Paisa, we really want to thank you for coming and taking your time. You're probably really busy with the project, and now you're already talking about phase two. So I definitely know that you're busy, and you still took time to come out and also answer almost every single question that I had. It's all there.
How
And
many were left?
just two, which is also like not really a question. It's thing people think it's just the comments. But yes,
Oh,
just
okay, I'll
two.
see. Okay, I'll quickly address them then, like really quickly, just to finish it off. Okay, so
Okay.
people say that Caesar claiming Khalistan and Kinda. Yeah, brilliant, do it. You guys got my support. Whatever you call it, just make sure the policies and stuff are good. And Azadis, right? I'm biased, obviously. And 28, how can we make 1 billion, provide £1 billion worth of value? The people want to trade 1 billion. Lastly, you sound like you're from Birmingham. Nearby, not too far away. I'm near Leicester, but I was born in Birmingham, so maybe that's why. But yeah, that's that. I think that's completed them all now, right?
Anji, you
Yeah.
did. Yep, all of them,
The-
every single one of them. So that's amazing, Baisaji. Thanks so much for coming and taking your time. Hopefully, we can do another talk with you once your phase two is out, and we're probably gonna have more
yeah,
questions and more points to discuss on. But
definitely.
thank you so much. I think you guys are doing a really amazing job, specifically with educating us here and all the Sikhs, and bringing this perspective forward and making this like a practical approach to
Yeah,
like these Sikh ideology, and also like references you give from Pant Prakash. It's really amazing that how you're tying it, and also giving those references from the history and how gurus have done it, how they have developed cities, and how they were running it. So it's amazing that you have that historical knowledge plus the current economical knowledge about the world.
yeah. Now, all credit to Maharaj. It's them. I'm just merely a mouthpiece here. But yeah, if anyone wants to get in touch with me, ask me more questions, etc., you can do from my Instagram, Azadism official. I'll send you the links and stuff as well. You can share it through.
And
Or
you
you
already
can,
shared the Instagram link with everyone.
yeah, yeah. And then just get in touch with me if you guys have got more questions or want to connect with me or anything.
Andy, sounds good. Thank you so much, Paisa, for coming and taking your time. We really enjoyed the talk. People are already commenting that was very insightful. So we really enjoyed it. Thanks so much, Paisa ji. Waheguru ji ka khalsa,
Uh,
Waheguru ji ki fateh.